How we got here at a previous board meeting, one of the members had requested an overview of the accreditation process. The board is mandated by statute to accredit the schools and colleges of optometry. We've always had ACO provide that accreditation. As you probably remember, we are working through a regulation to put it into regs that we had delegated that authority to ACO. They are the only accrediting body in the United States. And so we wanted to provide this education to the board members on what this process looks like, and then once after they provide the accreditation, what the monitoring process is of that school, because it doesn't just stop upon initial accreditation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Campbell and his presentation.
Can you hear us, Dr. Campbell?
Very much.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, can everyone hear me, first of all?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good, good. Well, good morning. It's 2 hours later here, so I have to catch myself and be certain that I allude to the right time of day, but I'm happy to be here to represent ACOE. My name is Bart Campbell. I'm an optometrist. I am an optometric educator, and I'm currently the chair of the Accreditation Council on Optometric Education. Just a humorous note, for a couple of sentences there, when you were referencing ACO, I was thinking, what is she talking about? So we never refer to ourselves that way. We always just spell it out, ACOE, but ACO sounds a little more trendy, so I'll have to suggest that to the council the next time we meet. But you'll hear me refer to us as ACOE during this presentation. What I wanted to do was essentially cover those four topics right there. What is ACOE, what is accreditation, a summary of some of our recent activities, and what we see as our relationship to the state boards. Certainly, if there's time and if your process permits, I'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation as well. Probably the best place to start when you're learning about ACOE is to look at our mission. This is our officially adopted mission, and this is how we see ourselves. As you can see there, I won't read the thing word for word, but ACOE, we view ourselves as serving the public and the profession by establishing, maintaining, and applying standards to ensure the academic quality and continuous improvement of optometric education that reflects the contemporary practice of optometry. And this next sentence is important. Our scope encompasses three types of programs: professional optometric degree programs, optometric residency programs, and optometric technician programs. We do not accredit anything else. Our composition, we have 11 members. 3 are members of the profession who are nominated by the AOA. 3 are educators who are nominated from the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry. 2 are members of state boards who are nominated by ARBO. There are 2 public members, and there is 1 optometric technician members. A very important concept here is that you see those abbreviations in parentheses to identify where members are nominated from, but no one, once they're selected for ACOE, is there to represent a particular organization. The idea is to have a diversity of experience on the council, but once on the council, for example, even though I'm one of the educator members, I do not represent ASCO. ASCO has its own board, and if they need to meet with ACOE, those are the folks that represent ASCO. And the same for the other organizations as well. Here are our current members, practitioners that were nominated through AOA, Dr. Timothy Hugg, who is a practitioner at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas, Dr. Darren Paulson, a private practitioner in Washington State, David Yang is a practitioner at the VA in Cupertino, California. The educator members, including myself at the top there, Stephanie Messner, who is Vice President and Dean for Academic Affairs at the Illinois College of Optometry, Stephen Schwartz, who is a faculty member at the State University of New York. Our 2 members that were nominated from ARBO are Chris Olson, who is a practitioner from Iowa, and Bill Ratcliffe, a practitioner from West Virginia. We have a couple of very talented public members. Dr. Karen Kirschenstein has a PhD in physics, actually, but she has an extensive background in accreditation, and actually at one point was the director of the Accrediting Agency Evaluation Bureau at the United States Department of Education. And Dr. Laura Newman, who is a dentist, also coincidentally happens to be from California. And in addition to having practiced dentistry, she also held a senior position related to education and professional affairs at the American Dental Association before she retired. And finally, we have an optometric technician member, since we do accredit optometric technician programs, and that's Ann Haydenbaker. We have a very talented full-time staff. All of the individuals that I just mentioned, the actual council members, are volunteers. None of us are paid to serve on ACOE. We do it essentially out of a sense of dedication to the profession, and in the case of the public members, because they have served on other boards and we were able to convince them to serve on ours, but no one is actually paid to serve on ACOE. We do have a professional staff that are headquartered at AOA's offices in St. Louis. Our director, longtime director of ACOE, is Joyce Urbeck. Tracy Worth is our assistant director. Fida Scaletti is in charge of residencies. Kyla Evans coordinates site visits, and Jenny Mittler serves as a general administrative coordinator. Obviously, with the number of programs that we'll talk about in just a moment, the 11 council members could not do all of the accreditation visits that occur during a year, and we depend heavily on volunteers who donate, just like the council members do, their time to serve the council, particularly on site visits. We have non-council members who serve on some of our committees, and this takes an enormous amount of time, and we couldn't do our job at all without these members of the profession who give willingly of their time. So what is accreditation? Well, the way we look at it is a process of self-study, which the programs do themselves, an external review, which is what the council does, and the intent is to ensure that an educational program meets or exceeds established standards. The process is continuous, and during my introduction, I think that was one of the issues that your board was interested in. When a program is accredited, it is not a done deal, see you in a few years. There's a continuous process. Essentially, it starts out for a brand new program with an application to be accredited, or in the case of an existing program, a reapplication to continue accreditation. The program is required to complete a self-study, which is a very detailed description of how it feels that it meets each of the ACOE's accreditation standards for that particular type of program, whether it's an OD degree program, a residency, or a technician program. There is a site visit by at least 2 individuals in the case of a residency, more in the case of multiple residency visits, or in the case of an OD program, by a site team that's selected by the council. And if it's an OD program, it will have 1 or more council members on the site. The site team actually reviews the self-study for a couple of months ahead of the visit. It goes on the visit, reviews the program, inspects the physical facilities, talks to the people there, and then, after all that is completed, the site team has to write an extensive written report. After that report is edited for clarity and ensuring that it meets certain stylistic conventions that the council requires, a draft of the report is sent back to the program where the program can look for any factual inaccuracies. The program can't take issue with opinions that the team expresses, but for example, the team writes that there are 3 residents on site at a residency program, and in fact there are 2, then that's a factual issue, and the program can point that out. Once that's done, the council has 3 regular meetings per year. The site team report will be reviewed by the council. The ACOE then makes a decision about the program's compliance with the standards, and if the program is found in compliance, it will receive the status of accredited, but for a maximum of 8 years. And this next part is important. Once that decision is made, every program that we accredit is subject to annual review and review of any substantive changes. The annual review, even if there are no changes taking place at the program and it's moving along steady state, every program is required to complete an annual report, which again addresses how the program is meeting ACOE standards. Every annual report is reviewed by the council, and if any issues are uncovered, then it's followed up with the program, either by site visit or additional communication. If the program has a substantive change, let's say that it is an OD degree program and they have a new dean, then that is submitted to ACOE for review to see if the new dean meets the qualifications that are required in the ACOE standards. So it's very important to understand that this is a continuous process. Briefly, I'd like to go over a little bit of information about the standards themselves. We have separate standards for each of the three types of programs that we accredit, and I imagine that your board is most interested in the standards that deal with the OD degree programs. We review our standards on a regular basis. We never go longer than 5 years between beginning a major review. We started that process a little over 2 years ago for the current, actually the most recent set of OD degree standards. And as you can see there on the slide, after spending about 2 years on that, seeking feedback from communities of interest, which include state boards, among others, we adopted new professional optometric degree standards, which became mandatory on July the 1st of this year. There are some key differences, but first of all, the standards themselves, there are 8 major headings of the standards. You can see the first 4 there, and the second 4, and we believe that they are quite comprehensive in addressing the major areas of concern for any OD degree program. One of the key revisions that we made is that in the 2009 standards, we required the program mission and its curriculum to prepare graduates for. In 2009, it said entry-level practice as defined by the program. The council came to realize over the past several years that that definition, the entry-level practice being defined by the program, while intended to give programs latitude to innovate, that might be more latitude than programs should have. And so we've tightened that up a bit, and now it specifically says to prepare graduates for independently practicing contemporary optometry. Now again, the council has to exercise some judgment there, but in essence, the program can't just simply say, well, this is how we define entry level. If the council feels that it won't lead to a graduate who can practice optometry independently according to contemporary standards, then the program can be found out of compliance. Also, we had a standard on student achievement added. There really wasn't anything in the 2009 standards equivalent to this, but now every OD program has to demonstrate that within 6 years of initial matriculation, at least 80% of the entering students have to either be licensed, have passed all 3 parts of the national board exam, or the equivalent Canadian registration exam. In case you didn't know, we also accredit the 2 schools in Canada. The third key revision, again, this was to increase transparency because the council had developed some concerns over the preceding years that perhaps the information that some programs were publishing or making available to the public was not as complete or transparent as it should be. In 2009, you can see what it said. The program had to publish current and reliable information on its performance. But again, that phrase, student achievement, as defined by the program. For the new standards, the council has gotten very specific. You can see that we now require programs to publish graduation and attrition rates, first-time pass rates on all 3 parts of the NBO, and the ultimate pass rate for the preceding 3 years, or again, the pass rate on the Canadian exam. Fourth key revision, and the final one of these key revisions that I wanted to point out, in 2009, we stated that programs had to have criteria for selecting students, having a monitoring system for the performance of their program, and provide educational guidance to externships. That's really what all these are about. What we did for externships on the 2017 standards is get a lot more specific, and it's actually quite lengthy, so we didn't include it on this slide, but all of our materials, our accreditation manuals, which include all of our policies, as well as the full accreditation standards in detail, are available to the public on our website. So I would encourage, if you have detailed questions about that, certainly you're welcome to go there and review the standards themselves. When a program goes through our process, the council will grant, will either not accredit the program or will grant a specific accreditation status. The two that you see here, accredited means that the program generally meets the standards. Accredited with conditions means the program has major deficiencies with reference to the standards, and there will be a mandatory reevaluation within 2 years. Accredited with conditions is a bad thing to get, so programs don't want to get that, and if they do have it, they are being monitored very closely. We sometimes have questions about why does accredited mean program generally meets the standards. We give programs, when there are no major deficiencies, a little bit of leeway, and I'll give you an example. Let's say a program makes a change in its curriculum, and instead of 190 credit hours, now it has 194. But someone forgot to update the website, and the website still says 190 credit hours. That's a relatively minor thing. Nevertheless, one of our standards is that the program has to publish accurate information. So if we find something like that, the program will get what we call a recommendation, which is a bit of a misnomer, but it's just our terminology. A recommendation is actually something the program has to come into compliance with. It'll get a recommendation, but we don't lower the accreditation status for a minor thing like that. The program will have a certain amount of time, generally 18 months to 2 years, to come into compliance. And typically on scenarios like the one I mentioned, they'll come into compliance just as soon as they can get their website updated. So that's just a little explanation about what that means. We do have what is termed pre-accreditation status. This applies to new programs, not existing ones. As you can see there, it's explained. Developing schools and colleges of optometry apply for what we call preliminary approval, and that is granted to a program that's being developed and is developing in accordance with our standards. Once a program has preliminary approval, it can begin student recruitment and offering the program itself. If a program has this status, we'll review it every year, and we will conduct a final visit in the 4th year of its first class to determine if it's eligible to receive full accreditation or not. It doesn't say that here, but it's important to realize, and this is in our policy manuals, if a program should recruit students before being granted preliminary approval, then ACOE will not visit the program for any sort of review until the first class is graduated. The reason that is significant is that means the first class would graduate without the program being accredited. So essentially it's a big no-no if a program were to begin without receiving preliminary approval. We also have a couple of what we call stage statuses. These are not accreditation statuses. This is the very earliest point. If someone comes to us and wants to start a new OD degree program, we use these statuses just to essentially let them know where they are in terms of turning stuff into us that we require before we will even consider them for preliminary approval. Again, these tend to be fairly detailed in their description, so I'm not going into that here. But again, all the information describing them is in our accreditation manual, which is on the web. Currently, there is only one program that falls under one of these statuses, and that is the proposed program at Alderson Broaddus University in West Virginia. And again, the stages are not formal pre-accreditation or accreditation statuses. They simply give us a way to monitor and tell developing programs, okay, this is where we consider you in the process at this point. Monitoring these programs, I alluded to some of this a bit earlier. Accreditation, the accreditation period for any type of program that we accredit is never longer than 8 years. We monitor the programs through annual reports and, if necessary, interim site visits. The programs have to comply with all standards within 2 years of their most recent site visit. So, again, for example, that scenario I gave you earlier as an example, if a program is cited for that, they have 2 years to come into compliance. The annual reports, any substantive changes or results from an interim visit could trigger a full evaluation visit sooner than 8 years. So again, the point here is we take our job very seriously as a council, and we monitor all of these programs quite rigorously. So, excuse me, just a little bit of review of what ACOE did in the previous year. We, as you might expect, since our business is monitoring educational programs, we tend to operate on an academic year, so July 1 through June 30th. So in 2016-2017, what did we do? We visited 6 OD degree programs, 43 residency programs, including 14 of those being new, and we didn't visit any technician programs in the previous year. Currently, we accredit 23 OD degree programs, plus 2 that have preliminary approval status. We accredit 210 optometric residency programs and 3 optometric technician programs. ACOE does have, we consider every state board as part of what we term our community of interest. That's not only the state boards, AOA, ARBO, and the schools and colleges, but also the USDE and other higher education accrediting bodies. But with state boards, we notify every state board of our actions that have been taken within 30 days of each meeting. We publish an annual directory of accredited programs. We distribute our policies and standards to state boards as well as other members of our community of interest before we adopt them so that we can receive comments. We provide our annual report at the ARBO meetings, and at the request of the programs that we accredit, we will invite state board members to observe ACOE site visits. And so finally, one other thing that I'll mention, I've been asked, we didn't include this on the slide, but you may be curious. Someone asked, well, does anyone watch over ACOE, and or where does ACOE get its authority from? And the answer is the United States Department of Education. We, as an accrediting body, are recognized, that's the term that they use, but you could think of it as our own accreditation, but ACOE is recognized by the United States Department of Education, and we've been continuously recognized ever since the USDE started that process, which I believe was in the early 50s. So that's something that we're quite proud of. We're evaluated by the USDE on a regular basis. Also, voluntarily, we submit ourselves for evaluation by an organization called the Council on Higher Education Accreditation, CHIA, is how it refers to itself. That's a non-governmental agency, but again, their function is to review accrediting bodies and determine if that accrediting body meets their standards. So ACOE is reviewed by 2 external entities, one of which is part of the U.S. government, and that's where we derive our authority. I already mentioned this, but here is our website. It's www.theacoe.org. And again, all of our complete accreditation manuals, the policies we follow, the standards themselves, as well as lists of all the programs that we accredit and their accreditation status are available on the website. So that concludes my very brief overview of ACOE, and again, it's up to your board. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions from board members? I'll start from my right. Mr. Morodromi.
So this may be a question for Dr. Campbell or for our legal counsel. And I look at it through the lens of an experience we had in California, not with the School of Optometry, but with the City College of San Francisco, when their accrediting board pulled, or I don't know what the term is, discredited the school, and that was quite a controversy, quite a legal battle. What is our role, the California State Board of Optometry, in relation to ACOE's accreditation decision? So if ACOE were to say, a particular school in California loses its accreditation, or if your report accredits them but with conditions, and the school says, oh my gosh, these conditions are unreasonable, or they're too onerous, does that issue then fall into our laps?
I don't see that it would. Your mission, I'm sure, is to protect the citizens of California by certifying that individual practitioners are deserving of a license to practice optometry. Where it would be of concern, I think, if I were on your board, is that if there was a school where there would likely be a large number of its graduates presenting to California for licensure, then obviously that would be something that would, to me, be of concern to your board. But in terms of any sort of dispute between the ACOE and a program that we accredit, that is basically going to be between those two parties. I am familiar with the situation in San Francisco, not intimately, but as serving on an accrediting board, you read about those things with perhaps more interest than you would if one did not. There were a lot of things going on both sides there in terms of how that accrediting organization was run, that frankly ACOE is just simply not in that situation. So I think ACOE is on actually pretty firm ground on decisions that we make. But nevertheless, there's always the possibility of a dispute, and ACOE has its own legal counsel and so forth in those regards.
So, Kirk, do you want to say anything on that question?
No, I think that pretty sums it up. If there would be an inquiry about what happened if a school lost its accreditation, then there would be the concern that the board would have about if those students matriculated from that school and was not approved, then could they sit for the licensing, or would it be granted a license? And I think that would be sort of a case-by-case evaluation of what happened and where they sit. So thankfully that situation hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I have a question. I just need a little bit of clarification on, I noticed you have 3, it's called technician, optometric technician. Can I just have some sort of clarification? What, is that a career for someone who's similar to an optician? Just a little bit more of the description of that.
Sure, again, the question I think is probably is real good evidence of why there are only 3 of those in the entire country. At one point in the 70s, ACOE accredited, and let me assure you, I don't go back to the 70s, but I've recently read some of our history as a group on how those programs have gone. At one point in the 70s, ACOE accredited, I think, as many as 13 to 15 optometric technician programs. And over the years, for various reasons, one of the biggest being, I think, that many ODs simply don't look for someone who has a formal credential in that area. The number of technician programs that are accredited has dwindled dramatically, so much so that within the past year the council considered dropping accrediting those programs, but ultimately decided, after hearing some comments from our communities, not to do that. Back to your question, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on that. Essentially, an optometric technician is the optometric equivalent of a dental technician. The programs provide formal training in various optometric skills that could be of use in an office, everything from lensometry to basic opticianry to performing pre-testing, all sorts of things like that, so that the person actually has formal training in those. Usually it leads to an associate's degree, although one of the issues in fewer and fewer programs being accredited is that the associate's degree is sort of going away. In many programs now, the ones that remain are granting certificates, and ACOE doesn't accredit certificate level programs. So some of the programs we formally accredited may still be in existence, but simply granting a certificate of completion rather than an associate's degree. So an optometric technician is a trained office assistant that assists an optometrist in the performance of his or her practice during the day. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yes, and I just want one further, maybe a question. Are you familiar with the Commission on Opticianry Accreditation? They also accredit there's 21 states that do offer education, and they provide a lot of the accreditation in those states. But what I understand, we're now starting Moore Park Community College. It's a 2-year degree program for opticians, and I understand from the state of California that the state of California already provides accreditation or degrees, so we wouldn't have to go through any commission.
Again, accreditation is actually voluntary. Now, when it comes to, say, an OD degree program, when I say that to people, they sort of roll their eyes because really the degree would be worthless if the program wasn't accredited. But technically, you could create an optometry school without ever talking to ACOE. As was noted during the nice introduction that I got, ACOE is the only programmatic accreditor for optometry OD degree programs. But certainly, particularly since there's a lot of overlap with opticianry, there's overlap with ophthalmic technicians that maybe historically were thought of more of as serving in ophthalmology practices. There's overlap there. So it's certainly possible for a program to be brought into existence and say, gee, you know what, I don't really want ACOE accreditation. And that's perfectly fine. I mean, you can have an unaccredited program. It doesn't work for OD degree programs and doesn't work too well for residencies. It could work for technicians, although I wouldn't recommend it. If someone's going to pay tuition wherever it is, I would recommend going to a program that's accredited by someone. But to answer your very first question, I am familiar with that organization, not intimately, but again, there is overlap in the area of technicians and technical training for ophthalmic practice.
Thank you. Dr. McIntyre?
This is Dr. McIntyre. I'm just curious about the program. How extensive is a site visit? What does that entail?
Well, for OD degree programs, it typically lasts 3 days. The usual agenda is that the site team, which will usually consist of 4 optometrists, usually at least 2 of them are members of the council. It will usually, if it's an OD degree program, it will always contain one of the staff members, either our director or our assistant director. The entire team flies into wherever the OD degree program is located on a Sunday. There is a pre-visit meeting held on Sunday evening. Then the site visit starts bright and early Monday morning, usually lasts a full day. Team meets Monday evening, goes over what it's learned that day, plans for Tuesday. Tuesday, again, another full day on site. Meeting again Tuesday night. Team discusses more and determines, how it wants to wrap things up. And then the wrap-up is held on Wednesday, and typically the site team leaves the program on Wednesday afternoon. It looks at all 8 of those standards, which I'll very quickly go back to those. You can see there, we look at the program's mission, goals, and objectives, its curriculum, research and scholarly activity, the governance of the program, its regional accreditation, the administration of the program, its financial outlook. And the reason we look at finances, quite honestly, is since our job is protecting the public, namely the students who would enroll there and who their patients might be, we want to know if the program is viable or not. We look at faculty, we look at students. That includes things like, is the program recruiting qualified students? We look at facilities, equipment, and resources. And finally, clinic management and patient care policies. These are major headings. First of all, I really appreciate the question because I'm quite proud of how thorough we are. But to really get an appreciation for the various things that we look at, you should look at not only these 8 major headings, but there are many subheadings under each one of these, specific things that the program has to meet that would take a good 30 minutes to go through, just going straight through without stopping for any questions. So I'd encourage anyone to look it up on the web and see. But those are the major things that we cover. After the team leaves, it prepares a LinkedIn report, which then goes through the latter part of that cycle that I described. I may have gone by it. But anyway, that cycle I described where it's reviewed by the council and ultimately acted on. So it's quite a thorough process, and I think that every program we visit after it's done usually feels like it's been very thoroughly inspected.
Thank you, I appreciate the information.
Dr. Chaha? No, Dr. Kawaguchi?
Just a minor question. Do you utilize unannounced site visits at all? Is that something that's used for continued accreditation?
No, we don't. And we get that question from time to time. Quite honestly, if you read through our standards, the way that we look at programs, and I won't say impossible, I'm not naive, but it would be very difficult to hide things during our regular site visits. And so, frankly, the council's not seen any reason to perform unannounced site visits. Most accreditors do not do that sort of thing simply because a lot of the information that you want, it's very difficult for a program to, hide things from you, the sort of things that we are looking for. So we don't do that.
Ms. Mitchell? Dr. Wong? I have a couple questions regarding funding. I'm on your site and I noticed that you have advertisers. So do your advertisers benefit from their postings of their ads, and if so, how?
No, we do not have any advertisers on our site. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
A link that was given to us.
So they're looking at the site for ACO from the AOA, and she's referring to in the bottom right-hand corner of Johnson, and it says Johnson & Johnson. I believe there's some AccuView. It says in the bottom, we make a difference in patients' lives. Can you scroll down? Sorry, that's okay.
Okay, frankly, I never noticed that. That may be something that AOA has on there, and whether AOA benefits from that, I honestly don't know, although, quite honestly, I would be surprised if they did not. ACOE's funding, and this was actually presented to ARBO. We didn't put it on this set of slides, but I did make it available to ARBO. And in fact, if you have a moment, I will bring up the ARBO presentation. I can show you exactly where our funding comes from. Give me a moment.
Thank you, because it was a link that we were given, and it's within the landing site is the American Optometric Association, but it's specific to the Accreditation Council on Optometric Education.
Yeah. Well, the short answer to your question is no, we absolutely do not. And what you're seeing is undoubtedly a artifact of us sharing a website with AOA.
Okay.
And frankly, it's a bit of a concern. I'm sort of glad you pointed it out. Let me find our 2017 meeting.
And if not, we'll send you the link that we were sent so you can check into that. So
Okay.
that led me to then where does your funding come from?
I'm going to show you right now. Is this, let me see, is this slide showing up on your screen now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. This is going to look very similar. This is just a lengthier presentation of our annual report to ARBO, but in that report, we do include information on our funding. Oh, there we go.
It's in our board agenda.
Okay, here is information on our funding. Prior to 1982, as you can see there, ACOE was funded entirely by the AOA. And before 2002, the accredited programs only paid the cost of their site visits. What we do now to fund ourselves is we charge programs an annual fee for the site visits, which are by far the most expensive thing that we do. The programs are billed directly, and they pay the cost for that. You'll see a reference to ARBO here. That's simply because this was a report to ARBO. But here is a pie chart. There's our 2017 projected budget. If you look, you'll see the majority of our funding, a little less than 3/4, comes from the types of programs that we accredit, namely VA residencies, other residencies, OD degree programs, and technician programs. There is a small amount funded by ARBO, and then a little over a fourth is funded, still funded directly by AOA. That's where our money comes from. Now, does any of AOA's money that we get come from that Johnson & Johnson ad? I have no idea. All I know is on that regard is that we submit a budget to AOA, and that's how it works out. So most of our budget comes from the programs we accredit.
Okay, thank you. The link was on our agenda item, just so members know. Okay, thank you.
Well, I really do appreciate you pointing that out because, frankly, it's not something that I had noticed, and I can promise you it'll be discussed at our fall meeting, which is our next meeting coming up.
Any other questions from board members? Questions from the public? That would be no. Anything from our EO? Okay, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today, and we appreciate being able to see you on webcast. I've been watching you from our side screen, so thank you.
Well,
Thank
you all. We're very happy to meet with any organization that depends on us, and from our view, state boards are one of our main constituencies because so many state boards, have it in their legislation that the applicants must be a graduate of an accredited program, and since that accreditation falls on us, we want to be completely transparent and have good communication with state boards. So thank you.
Thank you again. At this time, I was going to suggest
Thank you, Doctor.
lunch break. Do we have lunch?
I just wanted to make a comment. So, just talking to the associate dean who's in charge of of making the self-study for the ACOE accreditation, it is a really thorough self-study. I mean, it takes months and months. So, what Dr. Campbell was talking about before they even go for the site visit, the prep work that the schools have to go through for their own self-evaluation process through the self-study is very thorough. So.
Any public comment in general versus specific to the presentation on this topic? Okay, thank you. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to
Thank you, Doctor.
a break. Thank you again until 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, we have a presentation that will be starting at that time. So I ask that board members come back. Lunch is coming. Thank you. Back in session from our recess. Thank you. We're on item number 13, paperless licenses and renewals. Ms. Sieferman.
Thank you. So at the last August meeting, I reported how Maryland, after going to the ARBA meeting, Maryland had shared that they went to completely paperless. They went paperless renewals, licenses, applications. They are all paperless, and so that's something that I think that this board should consider doing. We spend roughly, I think I put $12,000 in printing and postage for the license. And so how it is now is if they go and apply online, whether it's for their initials or the renewals, and while it's done in real life time in Breeze, they still have to wait for a couple weeks for that to be printed and mailed to them in the mail. And they want it obviously faster than that. It also costs us to process this that way. And I think with the times, I think everything is going electronic, and to me it makes more sense to work with our IT department and make it completely paperless, to make it electronic. I haven't talked to the IT team because I think this is going to be a longer endeavor, but before pursuing this, I wanted to first see if that's where the board agrees on going, mainly because this is something that we've always done. We've always had the paper, the optometrists have always had the paper to post on their wall. If they get a replacement license, they have that to post. They also get pocket cards to carry around with them as evidence of licensure. There's no statutory or regulatory requirement for that. So it's just something that we've always provided. And obviously because back when we started these processes, that's just what was available. But I see it working now, and I will say I don't know if this is possible, but I'd like, as soon as it's processed, so whether we issue the license or the renewal is processed, I see them completing that transaction in their account. So the professional members hopefully you'll have Breeze accounts, and you can go in there and you would see a link to the document. So however it's mailed to them would look the exact same, but it's just a PDF they click and they can post. So only they would have access to it. The public wouldn't have access to that portion of it, which is print, so it's not manipulated by anyone else. And it'd be the exact same thing as the paper. And so I wanted the board to consider that if professional members have concerns before I go and find out how we can do this. So with that, I'll turn it over.
But could there be an option, let's say for those people who are not very technologically savvy, to have a paper copy mailed to them?
Yeah.
If they wanted it.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have that. We're going to have people who just don't want to go online. They want paper things, and I think that we can provide the opportunity on our website to do that disclaimer that if they want a paper document to be printed to them, they can contact us and we can print it in-house, because I think that that's going to be minimal. That way we get rid of the contract that we have with our printing vendor, which obviously is costly. So we would do it in-house for those who request it. We can purchase the paper ourselves and print it in-house. So it's available to them. I would just highly encourage the online, obviously.
Could you charge a minimal fee to cover the hard costs for the postage, the time, and then the paper? And that way that might...
So currently, it's all part of their renewal fee that they pay, so all optometrists would pay that. The only caveat to that, if they wanted a replacement license and they don't want the replacement online, because there's a $25 fee for a replacement, so that's what they would still pay for. But as far as doing just a separate fee for that transaction, that would require a statutory change.
So you're it's a wash, because you're already paying it out of your licensing fee, but Dr. Kawaguchi decides, I'm just going to go ahead and print it. Dr. Wong said, no, I want it to mail it. They cancel each other out in terms of cost.
Well, I actually think that we would end up saving a lot of cost, because I think there's going to be a slim portion of the people who are going to request the paper.
That's okay.
But I do think it's also going to help because I mentioned a few times now that my goal in 2 years after we realize all the efficiencies that Breeze is bringing, to do a fee audit to find out if each portion of our license process, if the fees are adequate. And I think I see that being as a portion that we look at to see if we should maybe decrease costs here and try to have a fee for just those who want it printed. So that's something that we can look at. Yeah.
I have a question. In the future, would this also be mailed to opticians as well, or?
Yeah, so they're online as well. So whatever is discussed here, my goal would apply to all license and registration types.
Are there any learned risks from Maryland?
Not that I have heard. I asked them at the meeting and they still haven't had that. They were expecting a higher amount to request the paper, but they haven't received it. But during our now quarterly committee meetings, I will obviously get more input from them.
So the $25 we charge for the lost copy, does that
For
cover
replacement.
for replacement? Does that cover the cost of the replacement copy? Does it cover all our costs for the replacement copy?
Whether or not it's covering the actual cost, I don't know. I know that fee was put into place a long time ago, but that's part of the fee audit to find out is it really covering the entire cost. But that's the intent of it, is to cover the cost of it.
And then you said that the statute requires a paper copy?
Does not.
No.
There's no statutory or regulatory requirement that we print and mail to them.
Okay, so we could stop
Right.
if we wanted to. Okay.
Mr. Epler?
I have, Ms. Sieferman and I have spoken on this issue. I have some apprehension of going one direction only. I think unless the legislature persuades us to go that way, I think we could stress and certainly emphasize the benefits of going paperless and renewing paperless and printing your own copy, but to shut off and make it one direction only,
Right.
one method only, one medium only would be, I think, a bit trouble without some statutory cover.
No, and I think that goes to Rachel's point too. Rachel or Dr. Wong, to make sure that was still available. If they wanted to do paper, they could get paper.
Charge or at a charge
No,
or
so that would be right now it'd be the same as their renewal fee because it's all part of it. Once we figure out the fee audit, then we can decide if we want to do a separate.
Well, and I think if you start by making it available, you start by not charging a fee, then you wait and do the fee audit, and then people have already had, because you're saying, 2 years on the fee audit?
Yeah.
People have, but you don't know how quickly, this is just a first step. There's still
Right,
other,
yeah,
so you
yes.
could talk another year before
Yeah,
this
oh,
is
yeah,
even available.
yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments from the board? Mr. Hepler?
Ms. Sieferman, I presume that you're looking for a motion from the board to direct you to fully explore the feasibility and the parameters of doing this.
Yes.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Michelin, before you call, any more comments from the board on the motion? Okay, public comment? Seeing there's no public comment, now we're ready for a vote.
Okay. Ms. Brandvine?
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky? Aye. Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke?
Aye.
Dr. Chawla? Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci?
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre?
Aye.
Mr. Mordami?
Aye.
Ms. Ferber is absent. Dr. Wong?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We'll now come, Mr. Hepler, you look like you're, okay, we're going to come back out of sequence to agenda item number 18, please. Presentation by the Department of Motor Vehicles. If we could ask the speaker to come up to the speaker's table, we'd appreciate. And then we'll pick up on agenda item 14 afterwards, which will start the committee updates.
So I'd like to, sorry,
Go ahead. I was going to turn it over to you.
turn over to Kurt Hepler. He worked with DCA's legal team to arrange this meeting with the DMV and the state audit. So Kurt, if you could provide a little background and then introduce Mr. Conway.
Thank you, Ms. Sieferman. Members, as you know, the DMV operates and administers the Disabled Parking Placard Program. Recently, that program was audited by the Bureau of State Auditors, by the Bureau of State Audits, excuse me. The auditor herself came out with a series of recommendations about how the program could be improved. Some of her recommendations involved the healthcare boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs, specifically those healthcare boards which can authorize through the completion of a form the granting of a disabled placard for parking. And so Mr. Conway from the DMV and I and some other boards met, and we invited him to present at this meeting to explain how the program works, how the auditor's recommendations can be implemented, and answer any questions you may have. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Andrew Conway from the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Hi there. Yes, I'm Andrew Conway. I'm Deputy Director of the Registration Operations Division at the department. Thank you for having me. As Kurt said, the state auditors spent much of 2016 with us. It was wonderful. And they came out with a series of recommendations for us. And I am just presenting to you not just what they presented, but what we actually would like to do with the board, and we're also attempting to do with all the other licensing boards under DCA. So the auditors recommended to us that we provide the health boards applications for review by your designated medical experts to ensure the disability certifications meet statutory requirements. We've been speaking about that, and we're concerned with the idea that you go forward and provide experts applications that were certified by other optometrists for sort of a peer review. And we're actually going to not go into an agreement with that. The two items we do want to go into agreement, or the three items that we do want to enter into an agreement with the board on are, number one, to provide us signature samples so that we can validate on a quarterly basis applications that we've selected for audit. And that's to validate that the optometrist who's presented on the application actually did complete the certification himself. There has not been a significant finding of fraud in this area, but we have had instances where a doctor's staff has completed the application. A lot of times with good intent. Doctors are busy, but the certification process requires the actual licensee to make the certification. The second thing that we would like assistance with is to provide us, actually, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. The second thing that we would like to do is have you act upon any actions that we might put forward to you, act appropriately. For example, if we found evidence of provider fraud, or if we found evidence that a provider's credentials were being misused by someone else, we would like to take that information to your staff for appropriate action. The third thing that we would like in the agreement is for you to disseminate on our behalf materials, information that we think would be beneficial to the community in making certifications on our forms, best practices there, and best practices in keeping information that validates the certifications. Doctors are required by statute to provide evidence that they keep on their own hands to substantiate the certifications they've put forward. And there actually is a provision in law that authorizes local governments to look at some of these files, and so it's of everyone's benefit to have that information available if a local community chose to take that action. So those are the three things that we would like to do. The fourth, the peer review, if you will, we understand in our conversations at a staff level that that's probably not something that we want to pursue, though our department might enter into individual agreements with providers to look at information on our behalf.
Thank you. Any questions of our presenter from the board? My right side, Dr. Turetsky.
What does what we do have to do with issuing a placard? It would seem that if somebody is visually impaired to the point where they're unable to drive a motor vehicle, they probably shouldn't have a disabled placard. So how many of these do you receive from optometrists? And can you give us a rough idea what the usual diagnosis is which makes one of these valid?
That someone's blind. The disabled person placard is issued to anybody with a qualifying disability, and that includes estimates of visual acuity, blindness. The reality is that disabled person placards are owned by anyone with a qualifying disability, not just drivers. Children, the elderly who are in nursing homes, people who are institutionalized or hospitalized, people who are disqualified from driving, they have conditions that impair their mobility, and they need a placard to get from a car that a caregiver is operating to the front door. I don't have estimates on how many of the placards are issued by optometrists.
You answered it for me right there, because I was always under the assumption that the placard is issued for the driver, him or herself, not for somebody who would be a passenger with the driver.
Right. The other instance we have, just to sort of complete the train of thought too, is we have a disabled person license plate program and a disabled veteran license plate program. And very often you'll find people who aren't qualified to drive who still own a motor vehicle and have someone else provide their transportation.
That's very enlightening. I had no
Okay.
idea.
It's all right. It's there are, you know, it's a good question.
Really helpful. Mr. Mordomi?
So you asked, like your first ask is an agreement regarding, this is how I heard it, an agreement regarding enforcement. That if you find a problem, that you can refer a problem to us and we can use our enforcement procedures.
Right. Essentially that you would accept our referrals.
Right. Wouldn't we accept their referrals anyway? And would we have, do we have power to do anything about it if an optometrist is, you know, signing all these things and doing, is that within our enforcement authority?
Right, so if in fact, we, just hypothetically, if we found an optometrist that was perhaps selling these for a small fee, whether you have problems with visual acuity or not, everybody who walked in the door got a free chicken dinner and a placard or something like that for a small fee, potentially the board could take action because that's probably unprofessional conduct. It certainly may be categorized as a fraudulent or dishonest act. So my understanding is what DNB is looking for. And please understand, these ideas of the interagency agreements and the binding are really in their infancy. We haven't seen anything yet. We've had one meeting. We've had some conversations. So that's the way things are trending. But to answer your question, we would probably take that as an input. It would go to the complaint process, vested through the discretion of the executive officer, and she may elect to look at that contract with an expert, have an expert review, determine whether it's unprofessional conduct, and then that may proceed to various enforcement mechanisms. So the answer to the question is, yes, I believe the board should take that as an input.
If it's helpful, we'll probably in most cases that we've had in the past, we haven't had a lot of them, we're pursuing, and our investigators are peace officers, and in parallel with this, there are criminal proceedings and criminal charges that are coming up involving a provider.
In the last, Kurt, I think you alluded to this in your introduction. What does it mean to have an interagency agreement? You know, everything the representative from the Department of Motor Vehicles says, it sounds great to me, but you know.
Right, so interagency agreement is a fancy word for a contract between two state agencies. And generally speaking, those are done at they're not done at the board level. They're done with the delegated authority down to the executive officer. However, given the nature of this, I think Ms. Seifert and I felt it appropriate that the board be aware of this because of, number one, it's another state agency, number two, the relatively high profile, number three, the involvement of the state auditor. So when those agreements come before the board, I don't know that it would come before the board and we would vote on them. I think that probably the way we would be going we would more inform you that those have been executed at a kind of at the executive officer level, because individualized contracts for whatever happened for training or whatever, generally the board does not, act on those. So this is more of an awareness issue than I think than anything else.
So, contract has a special meaning to me.
Right.
I would be happy to make a motion saying it is the intent of this board that, when the Department of Motor Vehicles sends a referral, we'll accept the referral, that, if they want us to disseminate their information, we'd be happy to disseminate the information. But what's the difference between that and a contract with them to do that?
What's the difference between a contract and an interagency agreement?
No, what's the difference between the interagency agreement and a board resolution saying, this all sounds good, let's do it? I mean, a contract means to me it's a binding thing, and binding means to me, well, we can breach that agreement, and that has certain legal ramifications. What if 10 years from now, for whatever reason, we don't like the agreement, or we
We don't want to wait any line anymore, right, at a DMV office?
I'm really pissed. Whoever is sitting in my seat is really pissed off about the line and says, forget the DM.
So I think as we kind of heard from yesterday, a couple of things, and one, I certainly understand your point. I think DMV, in order of public policy, I think DMV is seeking a degree of certainty and resolution to this matter so that it can assuage the auditor and the public that in fact it's taking appropriate steps and that we agree with those steps. So I think that's the primary thing. I think you want a degree of certainty. Would you agree, Mr. Conway?
Yeah, and if I could, I have a number of these agreements with other agencies under my own personal direction. Two things that I would tell you is one is that many of the agreements might contain a clause that one of us can just terminate the agreement. But the state auditor has made a formal recommendation that we enter into interagency agreements. So if we do not enter into an interagency agreement that the state auditor has recommended, we'll have to report that. And if that finding goes unfulfilled, it can result in a report to the legislature that we're not adopting one of their recommendations because of you, actually, because of you. So, and if I can, yeah, the idea really of a lot of these, and I have some significant interagency agreements. For example, we collect several $1 billion a year through an agreement with the State Board of Equalization when you tell us how much you paid for a used car you bought on Craigslist. Another interagency agreement we have is the smog check program we won with the Bureau of Automotive Repair. Those are really sort of to describe something that's already prescribed in law. Agreements like this one are really just sort of memorializing a policy that we both agreed we support. And I don't want to really call them for show, but they have a meaning in the sense that they represent to the public and to control agencies like the state auditor that we all formally commit to these practices, even though we know that absent the agreement, we would still do these things.
I'm sure our able lawyers will be able to write them in a way so that we can live with,
And I will bring my able lawyers.
So I believe we are not looking for a motion, but in light of what Mr. Mordomi is suggesting, perhaps we provide some kind of level of confidence that we feel comfortable with this agreement. But before we do that, Ms. Sieferman.
Yes, thank you so much first for coming, and I apologize for not attending that meeting. I had another meeting I was in. One just logistical question, because I know that you're asking for signature samples. So as I'm sure that it came up at the meeting, so I apologize if this is repetitive, but since we're moving to mostly online, so a lot of our applications are transmitted online, we will get to a point where we won't have signature samples to give you.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have I don't want to call it the olden days, but we'll have we'll have the original applications, but from here on out, I mean, since January 1, we're straying away from that signature. So just to let you know that we'll provide when we can, but when it's not there, we won't be able to.
And we understand that. Eventually, we ourselves would like to move to more sophisticated means of approving these. We think it represents a better sense of control. And I think these are often living documents, these interagency documents. So as techniques and program practices evolve, we take a fresh look at the agreements and we take a fresh look at the practices behind them, and we make adjustments.
And I assume by collecting the signature samples, that's to do a comparison of this signature looks like this signature?
Right. So to give you a practical example of the business flow, I will direct my staff to find 50 applications that were signed by optometrists in the last quarter, if there were that many. Seriously, I don't know how many there are. we would use the licensing configuration to pull those out of the database. We would pull those applications then out of electronic storage. And then I would send you those license numbers and say, can you send me signature cards for these 10, 20 photocopies are okay. And then we would just compare them. We have trained staff that can look at stuff like that. I think the auditors were a little vague on maybe having you do that, but I think we should do it.
I'd rather
We do a lot of
not
document
it.
fraud. We have,
It's just different every single time, so.
yeah, but they know how to look at that kind of thing, and this is what the auditors have recommended. As I said earlier, we don't really have a lot of evidence of fraud we actually don't have evidence of fraud in this area, but this is a practice they've recommended.
Okay.
I have additional comments. So, in light of that an optometrist may be involved in this was new news to me as well as my other professional colleagues on the board. I would wonder or ask if the Practice and Education Committee could evaluate a potential need to include laws that pertain to this into our set of laws and regulations that pertain to optometry, so that we may consider whether or not it should be included in our law exam. I'm not saying it needs to be, but I'm just saying that maybe we should evaluate that potential.
Duly noted.
The only optometrist that I can think of who would could be involved in this would maybe be people who are specializing in low vision, right? Because they are the ones who are working with a lot of patients who have in low vision. So people basically who are legally blind. Sorry. So if you have significantly impaired vision, or if your side vision is really, really small because of glaucoma, I think those are the people who would probably be the ones more often signing some of these forms. So I don't know.
And just to clarify, we don't have specialties. We can try to get people with experience in low vision, but we wouldn't be able to advertise for specialties in low vision.
Any other comments? Dr. Fresky?
I'm just fascinated by this, so just another question. So I want a disabled placard for myself, so I'm going to write a note for my dead aunt. And the DMV wants to verify, what my dead aunt's condition is. Do you have, or how would you go about getting a hold of those records? Would you have to go to a court, get subpoena power, pull the records, review my findings compared to what I put on the form to get the placard, fraudulently get the placard?
Well, I'm not really an expert in the law on this, but statute gives us the authority to look at those records and gives a doctor the obligation to keep those records. So it's one of our enforcement powers in this area is we can go to someone and say, can we see the records that substantiate this disability?
Okay, so that is in the statute.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
This program is provided for in the vehicle code, certainly not in the business profession code. So DMV has a whole section, I think 5,500 or something right around there, the 5,000 series regarding parking and off-street parking, and this is their code section, not ours.
Yeah, Dr. Kawaguchi's point I think is really well taken, because I had no idea that this existed, and I had no idea. Yeah, if there's some way that we could inform our licensees about this, I think it'd be great.
It is an area of law that a lot of people aren't familiar with, that it touches their profession. Ironically, because it's a mobility issue, one of the findings was that we have been allowing podiatrists to certify that people have mobility issues, only to discover that podiatrists lack the statutory authority to sign these. And so one of the recommendations, to your point, optometrists have this authority that you didn't know you had. Podiatrists don't have this authority. They always presumed they had. And that's another recommendation that the legislature is adopting. Do any of you have any questions in general about the program from other issues or something that I can help you with?
How often do you have to renew?
A permanent disability is just that. Once we receive a certification, then the person is entitled to a disabled person placard forever, or their license plate. Under the temporary disability program, which you might see red placards hanging in a window, those can be certified to no longer than 6 months before a doctor has to recertify. They can only be issued at a single basis, and each time they have to be recertified, and you're only allowed up to 6 of those.
Consecutively, or like, I'm assuming that's
Actually,
like a knee
under state law,
replacement.
it's in your lifetime.
Oh, really?
You're only allowed to, so if you're really unlucky, from a medical standpoint, we haven't really tested the waters of somebody needing a 7th legitimately. Their 6th one was like 5 years ago, and we haven't really crossed that path with a driver or a vehicle owner or someone, but that is the way the law reads. The other thing to be aware of is there is a statute. The number of the bill escapes me at the moment. I think it's SB 611, but I'm tracking like 75 bills right now. And that would adopt a series of recommendations the state auditor made to the legislature. They had a series of recommendations for us in enforcing the current program, and then they recognized where we were bound by statute, and they made a series of recommendations to the legislature. And one of those is that we periodically require recertification. The bill requires it, I think, every 6 years. So the placards are good for 2 years. We would give you one, we would give you another, then the third, we would ask you for a recertification by your qualifying medical provider.
Comments from the public or questions of our speaker? Thank you. Do we want to provide any type of guidance, or let it just stand that staff will interact with DMV working on the service agreement?
Well, do we need to, what Dr. Kawaguchi brought up, direct the Practice and Education Committee to look at the issue, to include that in?
We can make a motion to do that, or?
So moved.
Okay.
Can you restate the motion, please?
Here he goes.
We would move to ask the Practice and Education Committee to evaluate whether or not laws and regulations as it relates to the
Disabled parking placard vehicle code. I think
codes
that's what it is.
need to be included in our optometry laws and regulations summary and potentially included in our law exam.
Second.
Okay, discussion of the board? Public? Roll call, Ms. Michelin.
Ms. Brandvine.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Kawaguchi.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Mordami's stepped out. Ms. Berber is absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Members, just going forward, I'm presuming your direction would be to continue to have me and your new counsel and Ms. Seiferman continue to work with the Department of Motor Vehicles on the interagencies agreement and keep you apprised as that progress and that process matures.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate
Thank you for having me, and any research I can provide you on that motion, feel free to contact me.
Okay, before we come back to, in sequence 14, I'm going to revisit 9C, and which is the committee compositions. We have requested change. Deborah McIntyre will be replacing David Turetsky on Practice and Education, and David Turetsky will be replacing Deborah McIntyre on Public Outreach. I'd also like to announce that our 2 members of the Mobile Optometric Facilities Work Group are Donna Burke and Dr. Lillian Wong. So thank you both for taking on that assignment within LegReg. Now we'll turn to agenda item 14, the beginning of the committee updates. We'll start with Practice and Education, please.
Okay, so, so you have the statistics in front of you for the fiscal year 2016-17, where the Practice and Education Committee met 4 times, and we approved a total of 225 education offerings. And, sorry. And we denied 4, and 5 were withdrawn. The ones that we did deny usually had something missing and the applicants did not submit a complete application. And some of them, the deficiencies were corrected, others, the applications were just withdrawn. We did, we've had comments from people submitting applications that they felt that, we didn't meet often enough necessarily because the programs would come and go and we still hadn't met. So one of the things that we had talked about was meeting monthly rather than doing it quarterly. So we could just, as an ongoing process, approve applications. I think it would make it better. I personally have had to wait 6 months for, some reason or another, so to have a standing meeting and monthly approve these applications so optometrists aren't left kind of holding the bag, especially if it's getting close to their license renewal. They don't have proof that they actually took the classes that they did take. So that's one recommendation. One other thing that isn't listed on here, but I wanted to just mention, is that some of the people submitting applications have also asked us to kind of review what it is that we're requiring. It's a little bit redundant and cumbersome. And so that is one thing that, we were hoping to look at. So with the new committee composition, maybe that can be looked at as well to sort of streamline the process. Some of the things that we put in previously were done to make it more obvious to someone who isn't an optometrist to understand what it is that's, that perhaps the courses are about. And what's happened instead is that the people who are submitting them, they just keep putting in, verbiage and jargon that's technical. So that actually hasn't achieved the goal. So there were some suggestions from the previous committee members that we can carry forward and see what the new committee thinks about streamlining that process and making it a little bit better.
And the board did approve those at the April meeting. So those recommendations were brought at the April meeting and they approved them, so we can move forward with those.
Okay. Questions?
Questions of Dr. Chawla? Public questions of Dr. Chawla on the Practice and Education Committee. Thank you, Dr. Chawla.
Well, just one quick question. So now that we've updated the committee members and we're going to come up with more agenda items. Okay.
Okay, Public Relations and Outreach Committee update, please.
The Public Relations and Outreach Committee met twice since the last board meeting. The directive we heard was for the committee to come up with a public relations outreach campaign in general, even though we're focusing more on emerging technologies, but a broad-based communications plan would increase awareness and thereby address emerging technologies. So we met, discussed heavily, and determined that general awareness would address many of the issues and concerns that we have. What might that look like using current media outlets as a vehicle? So, Veronica, someone from the communications team participated in the initial meeting. Can you come up? Then I took the general discussion, Veronica and I put that into a communications plan format, which all of you have before you. We took it back to the committee to make sure that it accurately captured what they were recommending, and that is the document that you have before you. It is a working document. So at this point, I invite the other committee members to add to this brief summary. And then following that, we would welcome your input. And Veronica, I invite you to participate as well.
Thank you.
Any committee member would like to add anything? Not this time. Just for the record, do you mind introducing yourself?
Veronica Harms, Deputy Director of Communications with the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Thank you. And would you like to add anything?
Donna did a great job presenting the outline of the plan. The only thing I would add is that for the plan to be successful, there should be content regularly. And so that's what this represents, is a monthly calendar utilizing national headlines to be able to communicate your message throughout different vehicles.
Thank you. Any questions of our representative? Yes, Mr. Maragami.
So, earlier in the agenda, we were talking about cosmetic contacts, and the content is there. There's the pamphlet by the FDA. I don't know if there was a sample press release. It looks like there's even a video. I don't know whether we need to send something to the public outreach committee or whether Jessica can just do it herself and creating links on our website, links to the video, a press release, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I haven't actually had a chance to meet with Veronica on that yet, but that's one of my plans, is to take that and tap into the Public Relations and Outreach Committee when needed, but I think that a lot of the materials are already done. It's more of how we are going to now share that materials out to all the various links. But I think that at any time, if we need additional eyes or want some input, I think the Public Relations and Outreach Committee is a great avenue for them.
And the plan, the plan does include utilizing Halloween as a great way to bring that message about. So if the materials are already developed, it's a way to package it and use different channels, social media, YouTube, press releases, even op-eds in the newspapers, that the plan basically will do a month beforehand, brainstorm what the tactics are going to be for each different topic, and then push it out the month it hits.
And I just had a comment. I had a great time working with Donna. And, have we thought to go directly to like certain magazines or periodicals, or also to direct larger companies to see if they're even willing to put any of this information on their website? Because this way, all of the members who are part of that, who are opticians or optometrists, would be exposed to it. And they would learn in California, what is the Board of Optometry working on? What are their concerns?
Well, working with Veronica's team, that's the idea of this timeline. Once we determine what the topic is, then her team's expertise would help us identify what media outlet would be appropriate. Will we use video? Will we use Twitter? Will we use a combination of the above? And then release it. The critical piece, I think, for this board is, will you provide the committee the authority to go ahead and draft those releases and issue them without having to come for approval for every single media communications plan or outlet?
Thank you. Any further discussion before I ask for a motion? Yes.
I just have a question. Going back to the contact lens issue, I'm assuming the audience is younger for these contact lenses. Is it within the realm of possibility that we could go out and find a YouTube star? Can the board do that? I mean, if we reach out to, because that's the best way. I mean, the minute you get one of those YouTubers to take your message, that's the only way you're going to get these other kids to pay attention. Is that something we can do?
Yes, Veronica's team is very anxious to utilize video. We were talking with Dr. Patel earlier about the children's vision outreach, which is, I think, our first campaign. And she shared that she's treated infants as early as 6 months, and in 2 instances identified eye cancer. So had the children not come in, you can just imagine what the outcome might have been. So Veronica and I were talking about, can we get testimonials and what the video would look like, and those types of videos, I think, are what will grab our audience and get them to share the information, and thereby we will increase awareness. And then yesterday we had the testimony, someone can have 20/20 vision yet have all these other factors. That just hit me like, wow, because I have such terrible vision. I always assumed you had to have terrible vision, but people are walking around thinking they have great vision and they have no idea what's harboring behind their eyes. So yeah, we're real excited about the possibilities of using media.
Yeah, but make sure, as my daughter tells me, it has to be exciting or else she'll
Cool.
she'll turn it off. The other comment I would make too to the same point is particularly, with the children's vision issue is finding board members to author because that gets, especially in the different media markets, because then, a local paper in the East Bay might cover the one of you two because you live there, as opposed to if it's, Sid who's from Orange County and they don't really know. And the other question is, and you know this as well, Donna, because I think AT&T does it as well, but Comcast does the newsmakers, reaching out to the different cable stations and getting that free publicity, even if it is bringing in, to your point, what you're talking about with you could have 20/20 vision and self-issues, is pulling up a couple of either board members or experts who then can get that message out. I think
You'll see in your packets that we've already identified local media based on your zip codes. So that is part of the objective as well.
Any other comments from board members? Okay, do I have a motion to adopt the communications plan as presented by the committee?
So moved.
Second? I'll second. Thank you. Comments from the board on the motion? Comments from the public on the motion? We'll take a vote, please.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla. Ms. Garcia. Dr. Calducci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre. Mr. Moradami.
Aye.
Ms. Ferber is absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work on the communications plan and for partnering with our team.
Anytime.
Thank you. Children's Vision Work Group update.
So AB 1110 was sent to Appropriation Suspense file.
I don't know you're on.
Sent to Appropriation Suspense file. Some of you may know the Appropriations Committee put a $35 million price tag on the bill. Jessica worked very hard. We worked with COA. We tried to counter that. Unfortunately, the bill did not get out of suspense. It's still alive. It's not dead yet. We have until the mid-January to get it out of Assembly, the Appropriations Committee. And then if we keep it as a 2-year bill, it would have to be passed out of the State Assembly by the end of January to go over to the Senate. We will be meeting with Assemblywoman Burke and her staff. I'm anticipating August, maybe September, maybe once the legislature convenes for the recess, to kind of figure out our next steps. So, best case scenario is that we'll be able to work with the chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, get the bill out of appropriations. As I mentioned before, then we have a very quick timeline in order to get the bill out of the Assembly, the full Assembly. There's 80 members of the Assembly. We need 41 votes to get it out. I think Dr. Calducci, as in shape as he is, we will need board members to help us coming to the Capitol. What I would like to do now, if possible, or at the November board meeting, is come up with the framework of how board members, whoever would like to participate in that process, can participate. Meaning, how can we all be at the Capitol working on this legislation, dividing up among the 80 members of the Assembly to advocate for this bill? So that's an ask I would have, because I don't want to wait and try to do this all via conference call, special meeting. I'd like to have that framework done ahead of time. Should the bill not get out, then I think we'll have to come back to the board and figure out, what we want to do. We have a lot of support. I think we still could get this bill through, but for whatever reason, we just have some folks that are opposing it that, for whatever, they don't want to work with us, and we're just going to continue to push forward, because I think, as Dr. Kawaguchi can attest, It's very needed in the state of California. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
So the only thing that I have to add is one of our core responsibilities is protection of consumers, and I think we've all already agreed upon the fact that these kids out there don't have the loudest voice and we need to represent them. So thanks for your continued support.
And Ms. Michelin, would you like also to have us consider the meeting change? Let's get a pulse from the board now while we're all together as a contingency plan?
We can, I mean.
In case, if we
we
need
can.
it, instead of then having the emails going out and collecting votes and this and that.
For the January meeting?
Yes.
We could do that.
Needed.
Maybe it's a contingency, like I said, by November 3rd, we should have a better sense. I mean, hopefully now with, some of the things settling with the Affordable Care Act, some things have kind of settled, we might have a better shot at getting it out of the assembly folks, but that would be great.
Dr. Charlie?
Other than the price tag, what else is the pushback?
That it's not needed, that basically
What
the
are the
vision,
reasons?
the vision screenings are fine, and that it's okay for a couple of kids to fall through the cracks, because, that's basically, I mean, I could go into more detail, but it's really that what's going on in the schools is fine, that we don't need to change anything. Even though in these conversations, they will admit that the vision screening is outdated. So it's very much, I know, correct me, we had a stakeholders meeting. It was very hard to figure out why some groups oppose it, other than for business reasons, that it's gonna cost their business more money.
So related to the last comment, I think there was an underlying concern about unnecessary utilization of vision plans.
I'm going to be a little impolite for a moment. You can be as diplomatic as you want. So, I guess without naming particular companies, what businesses or what industry types have economic reasons to oppose this?
Insurance companies, anyone who insures. And I think,
So to clarify, we had support from the two largest vision plans in California, so IMED as well as VSP. So, but there were other insurance entities that were concerned about utilization. Some of them had came out and said that, and others did not.
I just have a comment. When it comes to business, although you're looking at a business, have you ever offered to, as you're talking, have we ever offered to say, sure, this is what you're looking at, but look at the growth that you could have if these children, you discovered them at their young age that they need eye exams. They're going to need them throughout their life. So what impact is that going to have for you in the future? Something like that draws some awareness.
yeah, that because then they look at it as costing them more money. I mean, the challenge is that when it comes down to this bill, all we are asking is that a form be placed in the packet when an example, I'm in the midst of filling out form after form for my kids because they start school next week. This is one more form that you can opt out. You don't even have to turn it in. All it does is raise awareness that vision is important. It's an important component of learning, and we are encouraging you to take your child to have a comprehensive eye exam. For whatever reason, there are certain entities out there that are misleading members of the legislature and what the intent is of the board. If anyone has other ideas on how we can clarify, I mean, Dr. Kawaguchi and I have done everything we can, and I will be perfectly frank, when we had a meeting with the stakeholders, it was one of the most frustrating meetings I've ever participated in. When you are dealing with folks that you honestly do not know how to respond to. And so that's what we're up against. And at this point, I think it would be helpful if we could find an avenue for more members of the board to come, and I know you all want to, it's a question of how do we make that happen? Because, in the past, we've had roadblocks put up in terms of the whole board being able to participate. But at this point, to have all of you participate, because you all bring different experiences to the process, you all have different relationships with members of the legislature, I think that would be helpful.
Well, I just have one quick comment. I know Mark will have something to say. If they're not checked, I have found adults in their 20s for the first time have eye exam, and I've seen those prescriptions. They're pretty high.
Oh, yeah.
And that, we're out for consumer protection. They're driving at night with a high prescription they never really accepted. Like Donna, you said, yeah, there are people walking around saying, the world is the way it is. You put them some correct, some spectacles. They didn't realize what they were really missing out, the details, especially at night. So if we're for consumer protection, we got to start bringing this in at a younger age.
I think, Dr. Coe, we sat in with legislative staff. We have sat in with legislators that share the exact same story. Exactly. One, I forget who it was with, they didn't realize that they were passing cows on the way to their grandparents' house. They thought it was as hay barrels, but because they couldn't see. We hear that when you go to the Capitol over and over and over again, yet we're still fighting the same battle that, as Dr. Turetsky reminds me, has been going on for years.
I have a question.
Sure.
Other than the financial consideration these insurers have, they're assuming we have some malintent as a board?
No.
What?
It's I think part of it is it's a scope issue too. It's right now I think the school nurses are doing the vision screenings. That's kind of what's in the statute. That's something that they take a lot of pride in, and I think there are school nurses that are doing a phenomenal job. The challenge is that unfortunately the state doesn't fully fund. Every school does not have a school nurse. So part of what we're trying to do is make the argument that we're also, in my opinion, complementing the work the school nurses are doing, because one of the arguments we've made is if a child goes and gets a comprehensive eye exam, when it comes time to do that vision screening, the school nurse will have that information. They could say, okay, Johnny has had his exam. I don't need to focus on Johnny. I can focus on the kids who have not had the eye exam. But for whatever reason, that's been, I don't think it's malintent. I think everyone agrees on the policy. Just for whatever reason, you have different viewpoints on is it necessary.
So one of the things that I sense from the key stakeholders that have been in attendance is that different groups have different beliefs about what is the most important things to ensure children's vision health. And there isn't always agreement on what the most important things are. And so there is a little bit of, we think that this is the most important thing, this is what we're responsible for, and there doesn't need to be any additional things. We tried really hard as a work group to take into account and listen to others. That's why going from SB 402 over to AB 1110, there were changes that we went through. So we tried to listen, take into account what key stakeholders were saying to make modifications to be more encompassing. And I think the challenge that we're faced with is somehow creating communications where there's a reciprocal openness to different ways of looking at things, because we certainly have a different way of looking at it as an optometry board.
So, Dr. Kawaguchi, in response to my earlier question, you said there was concern about utilization. Let me kind of state what I think you're saying, and that is, let's say I'm an insurance company, and under my insurance policy with my insureds, the members of the public, I promise to cover these eye examinations, right? That's part of what the public has bought. But I don't want my policyholder to know about that or utilize that particular benefit, so I don't have to pay for that exam, even though if that policyholder knew about it, they are legally entitled to take advantage of the benefit. Is that what you mean by concern about utilization?
That is not what was explained exactly to us.
I think you're.
Come on, Mark,
I think I.
Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that, to Dr. Kawaguchi's point, the two largest vision care insurance companies in the state supported the bill. So the two companies that are focused on vision supported it. It was some of the other companies that chose to oppose it. And it's public record, you can all look at the analysis and read the list of who opposed the bill. And, I don't think, and I'm sure Jessica has it, and I'm sure she can share it, she could send out the opposition letters and you can read why they put in there why they opposed the legislation. Now, some of them who opposed it that were not insurance companies, when we talked to them, said because it's a mandate, because they were told by certain entities that it was a mandate. We made it very clear it was not a mandate. The only quote-unquote mandate part of it could be interpreted as we're asking for the form to be placed in the packet for the parents to have to fill out, or the guardians. The flip side is the California School Boards Association nor any of the school entities opposed the bill. So, Dr. Kawaguchi and I don't know how many times when we were meeting with it's not a mandate. It's not a mandate. But unfortunately, that is a key word in the legislature. When you hear mandate, that draws attention to the legislation. Any other questions?
Dr. Tresky.
We had folks here yesterday who are fairly well known, Vision to Learn and See Well to Learn. Were they involved in any of the discussions?
So, Vision to Learn was engaged in the stakeholder meetings. They came once or twice, a couple of times. They didn't support the bill. Prevent blindness, did they? I can't remember. They did not support, did they?
But they didn't oppose either.
They didn't oppose. They both stayed neutral. So I going back, I think the other ask I would have, and I'm speaking for my colleague, is I think having letters of, if you have groups in your entities that could write letters of support, I think that would be great, because, we had, some of you might have seen the op-ed in the SACB. I received a number of emails from folks. Everyone, like I said, seems to agree with the policy. When you talk to regular folks, they support it. Unfortunately, we've got a couple of folks that oppose it that, they're paid lobbyists. We're competing against professional, high-paid lobbyists that are in the Capitol all the time, and we're just volunteers trying to do the right thing for children in California.
So one thought for bringing us all together on this issue, I think that was one of your asks. Could we do a legislative day just for the optometry board?
I would love that. I think that would be awesome. And I think that we had actually talked about that, because I think that the one thing that I will say is when myself or Dr. Kawaguchi would go in and meet with members or even with staff, they're like, you mean a member of the board? And I'm like, this is a board-driven issue. And when they see board members taking the time out of their busy schedules to come up and talk about this, because a lot of boards don't. So I think that would be an excellent idea.
And with you and Ms. Burke and Ms. Sperber having experience doing these kinds of visits, helping those that may not have the confidence or know how to, your colleagues on the board, we could provide them with tips and tricks. And I'm talking for your day jobs. You do government relations. And then we can have Dr. Kawaguchi provide us with the tips specific to children's vision and his lessons learned and what we can do. So I don't want people to feel intimidated because they haven't done this before that we're going to send you in cold.
Yeah, and I where can we, I mean, I'd like to do more research. That gives Bill's confidence to what I can address, so that where can we bring that information to you? Let's say, Rachel, I have some good insights about something that could be a winning thought for us to meet them. How can we get that communication to you?
Right, send it to Jessica.
And then she would get it, okay.
Yeah.
It's not serial.
And then I think the only, to your point, is figuring out the timing on when to do it. My suggestion would be, August is a deadline period. They're not going to be paying attention. I would say let's see and maybe do it before the Appropriations Committee in January. And I look, they haven't put up the dates yet, but I think looking at the timing, I'm thinking probably January would be a better time to do something like that.
So conceivably, just depending on the timing, could be the day before a board meeting or.
That's probably,
Too late?
it depends on the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations, and there's not gonna be a committee hearing for appropriations. They'll just be pulling bills off of suspense.
Okay,
So there's not an opportunity to go testify, but we can
knock on doors.
knock on doors prior to that. But part of it, I think we have to work in conjunction because Assemblywoman Burke is the author. And so what we can do, I think by November, we'll be able to give a really good report to the board. And then we can, but I think to Ms. Burke's point, in the meantime, if we can figure out how we can have a lobby day so that we can all be there, that's what we should be focused on now, so that we can then move forward with that in November with filling in the blanks with the dates and all that.
Thank you. So to go back, any comments from the public on any of this before I call for a motion? I think we're ready for a motion to discuss that addresses next steps, but Mr.
Before I comment, I'm just waiting to see what the motion is, because we have the intersection of a few things here, so let's,
Right.
I'll hold my comments until the material.
Wait. Ms. Michelin, what are you thinking in the way of a motion, or at least to help frame it? Or Dr. Kawaguchi, it's already being created, I see it going across his mind, no? Because you're looking for us to give direction to the work group, but also next steps as a board.
Well, I guess
We might have to break this up.
for the work group, I think the motion would be along the lines of continuing to give us the ability to work with the author in terms of next steps. Like I said, we need to circle back with the author, see where she is in terms of is this something that oh, we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if we move to the work. Yeah, what do we, other than if we wanna do Ms. Burke's motion, which is, so I don't think we need a motion for anything, just if, yeah.
All right, any other update you'd like to provide?
No.
Comments, question? Thank you very much. Okay, dispensing optician, Kurt, Mr. Hepler, you wanted to come back to an item.
No, I just want to, members, in the recent thing we did with the communication plan, and not on the merits, I just wanted to point out that the communication plan that would be the board's plan to guide its communications efforts, and it talks about recognizing technology, the online kiosk thing, as sort of the first step to eye care, health issues, and I just want to be clear that that is in fact what the board wants to do, because we've had a lot of discussion about, and this is on page 3 of the communications plan in the little chart. Seems like we've had a lot of communication, a lot of discussion about the limitations of technology, if there are any, the standard of care associated with online technicians. And here we seem to be recognizing the fact that it's the first step. So again, I have no medical knowledge, I have no optical knowledge, but that just seems a bit incongruous, I think.
Are you looking at changing some of the small words? Why don't you help us out here so
No,
that we're-
so basically it says, to doctors and professionals as the audience, on quote, the third bullet is online/kiosk eye exams are the first step to eye care, but the other exams are needed to detect eye health issues. And I just, again, that seems a little incongruous to me because we have some press releases that say, go get your eyes talked about. I think AB 110 talks about candidly go to an eye care health professional for your child. Is this, and again, I have no optical health knowledge, is this inconsistent with the direction? I just throw that out there because it just struck me, like you said, as a bit incongruous.
So help us, or I see that there might be some words that you might want to change out. I'm trying to get to the
Yeah,
crux of this.
so I think, actually, and I apologize because I made the comment at one of, not the most recent, but the one before that, about any communications that we put out there when it comes to refractions versus comprehensive eye exams. I think we might want to stray away from specifics, so the mode of how that's done. So the online versus kiosk versus refractions. If the true concern is that a refraction just simply is not a comprehensive eye exam, then perhaps go through this and maybe strike through online, kiosk, and just keep refraction. So you have refractions are part of this, it's not the comprehensive eye exam.
Right, and that is what the communications team had
Yeah.
indicated it preferred to do.
I guess my only concern with that is that I don't know if the typical layperson knows what a refraction is.
Yeah.
Right, so if you say refraction to,
Sid, before she sat on the board, yeah.
you'd be like, what, right? But if you say, oh, I use this online app, and look, I got my glasses. So I think we would have to go with maybe more possible layman terms for refraction.
Online eyeglass exam.
Online app or, it,
Yeah, online eye exam.
I think,
So-
I like the eyeglass exam. Yeah, because refractions or eye prescription
or glasses.
Yeah, I like the glasses. because
What
those
about
take-
refraction, parentheses,
Parentheses.
eyeglass exam?
And take out
Or I would go eyeglass exam with refraction in parentheses. I'm just talking to
Reverse
so
it
many
to
people.
public. Yeah, public then go technical.
so members, if I could, I'll get all parliamentarian on you. So we've already approved this.
Right.
So then we have to go back, we'd have to reconsider that decision because we've approved it. And now if we want to amend it, so we'd have to go back, bring that back before the board, and then tackle whatever you want to tackle.
Why would we have to do that? These are just themes, they aren't,
Well, you've just approved this plan,
Yeah.
by board action. You've approved the plan.
So as a member of the winning side on that, I move for reconsideration.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, any comments from the board on the reconsideration? Any comments from the public?
I'm sorry, I think we had 2 seconds, so which one is
I don't
it?
care, that part's fine.
Okay.
Okay, no comments from the public, so let's call for the
So
vote.
we're voting on
I
the
think we have to
reconsideration.
vote on the reconsideration and then make the new motion towards.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Tretzky. Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke. Dr. Chawla. Ms.
But I agree with him, we're just losing themes, right?
But I know, but our
But
legal
it's
counsel
part
is
of
saying
the
But
it's
it's the
plan.
themes are part
part
of the plan.
plan.
You've approved the plan.
Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calrici.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre. Mr. Moradami.
Aye.
Ms. Ferber absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, so now the new motion is,
Whatever, this is now, the world is now the board's oyster, whatever words it wants to put in there, it decides that for itself, and then it would approve the plan as it has been amended now. If they choose to amend it.
So I'll try and fix it. I move that whatever that particular item is in the plan, that it be amended so it doesn't necessarily tie the message to online or to simply online, but to distinguish between a simple refraction and a comprehensive eye exam, and I leave it to the communication specialists or our staff to use the right words so they communicate that concept to the lay audience clearly.
Can I make one request? That you not make it specific to that, because if we go back and say, oh, there could be this other item, so maybe delegate that authority for us to work with legal counsel to go through.
I'll include that in my motion.
I second.
Okay, board discussion? Public discussion? You can state your name for the record, please.
I'm not here to talk about that specific motion, but after that, there's a comment that I want to make that's general, so I don't know if it's appropriate now to speak. This is Christine Schultz, representing the California Optometric Association.
Do you want to speak to the motion, or do you want to hold your comments until we get done?
I'll hold my comments until after the motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we're ready.
Okay. Ms. Brandbein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla.
Aye.
Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Moradami.
Aye.
Ms. Ferber, absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
The public has a comment.
Thank you. Again, Christine Schultz, representing the California Optometric Association. I'm just looking at this now, unfortunately. And so there is some language in here, wordsmithing things that also we had concerns about. We wanted to just share with them, maybe at the committee level. I'm happy to do that. Like, for example, under policy makers, where it says the board supports new technology to advance eye care. However, there are some. Oh, it was right there. But anyways, I think we have a general concern about the board taking a position in support of this technology. But I'm not, it's again a very sensitive issue for us, and we want to make sure that the board obviously supports technology without specifying this technology, because I don't think the board is taking a support position on this technology, and in fact, it's the opposite. So that's just my comment, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. All right, next item. Now we'll go back. Ms. Garcia, thank you for your patience as we tackled the issue.
We had our first meeting July 14th, and the three presentations that we received as we were a new committee, we wanted to make sure the Deputy General talked about the disciplinary process, which was very helpful. And DCA, as you can see, also reviewed the legislative and regulatory training for us. And legal counsel came and talked about the Opens Meeting Act, which was really a good review for us to have. And we feel we were very productive because we came up with a list of what we wanted to work on. And in addition to all that, the disciplinary guidelines that we need to start for opticians, you can see the list there. Outreach, we noticed the plan that Jessica provided us. There were a few things that we wanted to work on right away because opticians are a little bit confused where they go and get their license renewed or their certificates, so we're working on that. Payment methodology, I think we're already on the process of that with Breeze. You can see education requirements and licensing. I think that all of these topics were very good, and we even had comments from opticians talking about scope of practice between large retailers and private practices, and why is it, you're in a private practice and you don't need a license as an optician, but when you're in a big chain, you do. So we are going to tackle that. So the list is there. You can look at from 1 to 10. We're going to meet again August 18th to talk about all of these in here. But what we want to bring up to the board is where it says action requested. Jessica brought up that we'd like to eliminate the need for a notary requirement on the RDO application. We don't understand why that needs to be there, and we were hoping that the board would look at that and put a vote there if we can remove that process. I don't know if Jessica wants to say a little more about that.
Yeah, just to add a little clarification, currently for optometrists, they have an attestation statement that essentially under oath that everything they say is true and correct. All All of the RDO applications, however, have that language in addition to a notary requirement. So even though they can now apply online, they still have to print it out and take it to a notary and then send it in to us. So it's additional work for them. It's definitely time consuming, and I'm not seeing the additional benefit to it. I asked our legal counsel to take a look to see if what is currently there with the attestation statement, if that was sufficient. And I believe Mina thought that it was sufficient. So with that, what I would like and what the DOC is requesting that the board make a motion that we when we update the applications, we totally remove the notary requirement. But in the process, because obviously that's going to require a regulation change, one, to put all the applications into regs. But since it's not currently in regs, and if the board approved processing those applications without the notary, then we can do so.
So anyone would like to make a motion on that?
So moved.
Second. Do you have a second?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. So comments from the board, Mr. Muradomi?
So explain this to me again. It's on the form, but it's not required by law or regulation.
So right now, everything on the form is not required because it's not in regulation. None of the applications are incorporated by regulation. So that's one thing. But how the statute reads, it's approved by the board. So I don't know if at one time the medical board had approved a mass applications. I don't know. What I do know is the notary is very similar to what they have for physicians and surgeons. So my guess is that they are just doing the same to be consistent. But there's no statutory or regulatory requirement for the actual application. But since it's a process that has always been done, I feel like I don't have the authority to say, okay, we're done with the notary requirement and go on. I want the board to make that decision.
Legal's just double checking things. Other comments from this half of the room? Any comments from my left side? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Would the public like to comment? Please
Just
state
quickly,
your name.
Catherine Austin Scott with Luxottica. I just wanted to thank the board for looking at this particular issue. It has created delays on our side in filling out those applications. And as we are managing our transition, it's important for us to look at this, and then we'll have other comments on the other issues. So I just really wanted to thank the board staff for taking a very quick look at this as we brought it up. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, let's call for the motion and vote.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin. Aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla.
Aye.
Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Moradami.
I'm gonna abstain.
Ms. Berber is absent, and Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
And then just to finalize, we do have already scheduled 4 meetings, and the committee is very confident we're going to tackle. We do appreciate members of the to come and help us. Their comments. We had a really good show of stakeholders, and we continue to invite you to come. Thank you.
I have a question. So, first of all, congratulations on your first meeting.
Yes.
It sounds like it was very productive, and that also leads me to my question for you. That's a lot of items that are listed. So were there discussions already in the first meeting about prioritization and what that's going to look like and what timelines are going to be, or is that going to be for a follow-up meeting?
That'll be for a follow-up meeting. Basically, the way we listed it is probably the way we're going to work at it. But we do have to change the priority a little bit, because some like items 3 is definitely going to take a longer, and items 4. All of this it is going to take a little bit more, but some of the outreach part of it, we can get that started. That's not going to take a lot. So we will, and if you have any ideas and how you'd like us to, or if you have any items do you think you'd like to place into the list, we welcome that as well.
And one thing just to clarify too, the order that you see is not the order that they had prioritized on. It was just these are 10 things that we're going to focus on. And I think the discussion too was, because we did talk about whether or not we're going to prioritize, and I think it was more based on resources and what we can accomplish, because I think that some of these are going to take several meetings to accomplish. So I think that we obviously want to tackle all of them, and it was based solely on resources. But if the board felt that there was something on here that you really wanted us to tackle right away. I think the committee was interested in getting that input as well.
I guess I'm looking at it the opposite way. I'd like the committee to come to us with what they believe the priorities are with the timelines, and therefore allow us to understand that based on their feedback, and then for us to provide reciprocal feedback if we're on the same page.
And perhaps you could place a level of effort in that chart, so we have an understanding where the low-hanging fruit is and what will take a longer horizon.
Okay, what I'd like to do is just draft something like that, Jessica, and then bring it to you, and then we'll talk about
Take it
it.
to the committee.
To the committee.
And then let them, or we'll wait on that day to
That'd
the
be a-
committee? Okay,
Wait for the committee.
all right.
Ms. Michelin.
How often are you meeting?
We have already scheduled August 18th in 2 weeks. That's how quickly we decided to meet again. And September 22nd and November 2nd. November 2nd, because the board is meeting, we wanted to see how we could just like sort of, cross with the board. A lot of the committee people want to visit with some of the board members.
And then where are we on the vacancy?
We're still looking for a person.
Yeah, we haven't received any additional applications.
Yeah, what we need is another
But-
person.
But there's a certain.
There's an RDO vacancy.
We can send out more applications.
Yeah. I just want to.
Jessica, with this new committee and this new legislation, of course, it's more work for all of us. I do know that staffing board meetings or board meetings, whether they could be committee or the full board, is a lot of time and energy on behalf of staff. How are you handling these additional meetings?
One day at a time.
And that's part of the reason why we're looking at changing the structure of committee meetings to try and get the in-person meetings in one day. It will help staff with all the different packets and noticing, et cetera. We'd just like to try that to help the workflow and, yes, the process itself. Any other comments? The public had comments on the topic in general.
Thank you, Catherine Scott. We did have a great full day meeting. The staff did a great job putting it together and the board members were great. We appreciate that involvement. I think when we looked at the list, it's an aggressive list. We had a lot of discussion about the application process that day. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask of our client that be a higher priority for us as going forward. As Jessica said, there was a lag to try and get us on Breeze. There's some ease in the Breeze system for us that's going to come inherent with that. There's some pieces along the way we also talked about, but for us, I think the most important priority for business and as we manage the transition required under 684 is that application process and various, what we talked about is, things like coupling RDOs, and I won't get into the details, but there's pieces and parts of coupling different applications together that bogs down the process as well. We would ask that as you consider those priorities and the board does, that be one of the highest priorities is making sure that process is efficient, and we look at how to make that more smoothly transition that program. So.
Yeah, we certainly invite you to be there so that we can
No,
work
yeah,
on that.
we appreciate that. It was a great two-way dialogue, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item, let's go ahead and.
So we understand that the board is directing the DOC committee to go back and take a look at the priorities and actually prioritize those 1 through 10 items and bring it back to the board.
Which is actually a part of, I believe, a motion from the last meeting where we said we wanted you to go out and prioritize. So it's following through on that which we already tasked them with. She's just providing where they are right now.
Yeah, we
I don't
just,
think there's a motion, we need a motion, no.
yeah, we just decided we gotta come up with a list.
Yes.
We didn't have
This is a
enough time
report
to put priority to it, because we need more feedback from everyone. Make sure we are working it just like right now. We're talking about now, let's talk first about the application process, and I know Jessica, there were a few things that are priority as far as what the public outreach for opticians, how are we reaching them? They're not understanding where they renew their license and where they renew their certificate, and then some of them don't even have that, so the outreach will also be there too.
Anything else before I move on to this topic? All right, we're moving forward with agenda item 21. Nope, no, we did 20.
19.
Oh, I'm sorry, scooted in there. 19, Florida Board of Optometry decision. Ms. Sieferman.
So this was something that was actually brought to my attention by another board member. So thank you, Dr. Tereski. But it was also discussed briefly at ARBO. Essentially, what happened in Florida is Florida has a regulation that says that the applicant has to have exam scores within the last 7 years of applying. So what happened was that you had out-of-state applicants who are already practicing in other states. They applied, they had passed the national exam several years prior because they had been practicing. They were denied. Then the optometrist sued the board and said that they basically went outside of their delegated authority. So that's where the ALJ came in and said they ultimately agreed that yes, it went outside of the delegated authority. However, how it was set up in statute, the board should not even be considering exam scores until after they applied because it was a condition for examination so they shouldn't even apply for the exam until they graduated. Well, that's not how NBEO is set up. NBEO, they can take the exam during 3rd and 4th years. So the respondents then had to, not the respondents, but the optometrists had to take the exams because it was an application for examination. So I think it was requested of us to take a look to see if this is what the impact is with our board, take a look at our statutes, our processes to see, one, if we have any law similar that could be outside of the delegated authority of the statute, and also what that means as far as having required applicants to wait to take the national exam until after they graduate. So I did do a preliminary review of our statutes and our regs to compare them, and I have provided a little information. I do think that we are set up differently than how Florida was. We do have a statute to apply for examination, but the only requirements is that they're over 18 and they pay a fee, and then they can apply for the application. And then there's a statute for applying for eligibility to apply for a license. So they are separate. We do have a timeline of exams between when they take the national exam and the California law exam. It should be within 5 years. That's supported by the statute and the regulation. But all of this was happening before I had a chance to speak with Mina, our new legal counsel. So she's also taken a look at it, and we're monitoring it. I just wanted to bring that to your attention that this is out there, something we're following right now. We don't see really big impacts to the board, but we're monitoring it. So I don't know, Mina, if you wanted to add.
Yeah, I had a chance to look at your statutes and regulations. I don't think you have a similar concern. And there is something in the regulations, as regulations usually, there's ways to improve regulations and make them more clear. I think it might be good to look at the specific regulation on applications and make sure that everything you're asking or requiring in the application is actually in the regs or it's incorporated by reference in the form. So I'm happy to do that, spend some time doing that with Jessica, but I don't see the same issue with your application procedures in the Florida case. I don't see that at this time.
Any comments from the board? Now, let's see, 21.
Yep.
We can go ahead. Why don't we do that? We're going to go to 22 and then come back to 21 since that will likely be a little bit more of an involved discussion. So, update on the strategic plan. Tretzky. I'll give you a moment to scroll through to get it. explain what your assignment,
Yeah, I will.
what your homework assignment was?
My homework. Okay. So, I was tasked with reviewing the issues that the legislature brought up regarding our strategic plan. There were 17 of them, as well as sunset plan, pardon me. No, strategic. Yeah, what you said. I was in charge of reviewing that. So I worked with Jessica and staff to review the legislative issues as well as the issues that the board brought forward to be sure that everything is addressed within the plan. We had pretty much everything addressed. There were some areas where we added a few more bullet points to make sure that those would meet the issues that were brought forward specifically by the legislature. Everything was thoroughly addressed as far as board issues. And just some of those that were added, and I'm colorblind, is that in red? Gotta ask. 3.8 through 3.11 were additions to the document that we had that we originally saw. 4.10 through and 4.11. And 5.9. So by the addition of those items, everything was addressed and should make this hopefully move smoothly, and we can have our sunset report completed and approved. Sunset report.
You're completing the strategic plan by comparing it against the sunset report where the legislative body commented.
This document.
Yes.
Yeah, we gotcha. Okay, discussion. Any comments from board members? Doctor, here we go. Mr. Murdomi.
So my comment is, or question is on, my only comment is on 5.9, conduct an in-depth audit of the board's website. Is audit the right verb we want to use? I'm looking at veterans of state government and maybe our legal counsel. Do you really want the website to be audited?
Is that what at the sunset hearing, is that the verbiage they use there? Or
I
is
don't
that
know.
our verbiage?
I mean, do we have to bring in the state auditor? What
Got it.
what are we talking about here? Audit. Audit is kind of a serious word.
Would review have been a better word?
Review.
I would be much more happy with review.
Okay.
I actually love audits, so.
And
I
you
think
can
they're
see
great.
where the word audit came from.
I think audits are great, so, okay, review.
Unless you're the subject of an audit.
No, I love them.
You're good? All right. With that word change, anything else? Comments from the public? So we can go for a motion to adopt as amended? If someone wants to make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
We have a second. Okay, Ms. Michelin.
Public comment again?
One more time, public comment? Okay.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin. Aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla.
Aye.
Ms. Markey. Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Muradami.
Aye.
Ms. Berber is absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Dr. Tresky, second.
All right, now we'll go back to agenda item 21 on the legislation impacting healing arts boards.
Okay,
Ms. Sieberman.
so the first one, and members, I just want to clarify too, the only reason why you see two bills opposed to the others that were listed in April is because all those bills did not make it out, and they were either pulled into two-year bills or they're just died. So you have two that we're still monitoring. You have AB 443, which is the the scope bill, and it is scheduled for appropriations August 21st. And actually, if COA would like to come and give any updates, if you have any, on the scope bill.
Hello, everyone. Christine Schultz, representing the California Optometric Association. I don't necessarily have updates. We are still in discussions with ophthalmology. Everything in the bill now in print is been agreed to by both sides. So there is agreement from ophthalmology, CMA, and COA as to the contents of the legislation. We are, like I said, we're still in discussions, and we expect future amendments to the bill as we move through the process. I can answer any questions.
Questions? Did we take a position on this bill as a board? I thought we had supported it.
So I can go back and look, because I didn't see where we actually took a formal motion to support for current vision, because the last version of the bill, though, for 1708, it was the what word am I looking at?
Spot bill?
Thank you. It was the spot bill language. So it wasn't, we had taken positions on prior scope bills, but this one, it wasn't in the form yet to take any kind of motion, because it was just a spot bill at that time. I mean, right?
That's right.
Just, would this, if and when this passes, would it require any administrative costs on the board's end?
Yeah, so part of the legislative process, especially with scope bills, they reach out to us and get a fiscal analysis on it. So I did estimate that it was going to be absorbable within our scope. Essentially, you're adding one certification. If we are able to build that into Breeze, there's not much of a requirement to it. They can apply online. They would attach their certification, which is the certification of the course that they have to do. They pay the fee. Essentially, our staff would go and yes, this is a certification, and approve it. So we didn't see an additional workload to this. The only caveat to that is part of the scope bill does take out a lot of the referrals that's needed in the statute. And when you look at our law exam, there's a lot of questions that relate to referrals. And so as part of our workshops, we have to stay on top of that to make sure that it's not going to negatively impact the item bank, because I think we estimate around 20% of the questions relate to a referral of some kind. And so I'm working with OPES to make sure we can stay on top of that, so we don't have to incur any additional costs.
Did you have a question?
I have a question for the CO.
Sorry.
Christine, are the schools of optometry supporting the bill?
We have, I believe so. I'm not sure how many letters I have in support, just because it's taken them a long time to get through their approval process for letters. But I have not heard any concerns. They're quite happier with this version than previous versions, quite frankly.
With the agreements that all the stakeholders have finally come to, are there specific immunizations in the bill now that optometrists would be able to provide?
That's right. There's a certification process. It's the same certification process that pharmacists have to go through. So there's training requirements that the pharmacy has already developed, and they would allow for 3 immunizations out of the number that are out there, and only for those that are over 18 years old.
Which immunizations?
It's shingles, flu, and pneumonia.
Okay.
So then, obviously your only opposition are the anti-vaccine folks,
That's right.
even though it only applies to folks over 18, right?
That's right.
It's not children.
I think they have a general
That's
opposition to any kind of expansion of vaccine authority.
So I was just curious if the board would like to entertain a motion to support or take any position on the bill.
I'll motion to support the bill, especially the cleanup language that's in it. I think it's really required at this point. So I would motion to support the bill.
I'll second it.
Discussion? I'm just curious as to why optometrists would need to provide vaccines.
We're primary healthcare providers, right? We see probably more patients than almost any other specialty other than primary care itself. So it's an entry point, it's access. It's good care. It's the same reason pharmacists got the authority. They're not even, the primary healthcare providers, but lots of people go to pharmacies. It was enacted.
And one of the things that we mentioned in our discussions with lawmakers is, optometrists see a different population of individuals. So there's like truck drivers who may not go to their physician. They may not ever be in contact with the healthcare system, but because they can't see and DMV told them they have to get glasses, they're in their optometry office. Those populations we could cover through flu and other types of immunization shots.
Give one more quick statement to Donna's point. I was speaking with Frank Giardina, former board member, who works at a federally qualified health clinic, and he will come across folks who haven't had a shingles vaccine. And if a physician or a nurse practitioner is not available, that person will have to come back to get the vaccine. In many cases, he's dealing with a migrant population which might not come back for that vaccine. And he said if that person is there and he's allowed to do it, he could just administer the vaccine right there in the clinic, no problem at all. So he said that, he's really a great example of why this would be a valuable thing. If you've got a practice in downtown Sacramento, plenty of options to get vaccines, but there's other options where it's not as easy for folks to get them.
Is there a prescription that then is handed off to an optometrist for any of these vaccines, or you're just waiting for the person who walks into the optometrist's office to say, I'd like a shingles vaccine?
Yeah, there's no prescription required. I mean, it would be just a person coming off the street or a patient or any other situation where the doctor would be.
Through health insurance, like with shingles vaccines, there's a minimum age, 50, I think. So it's not, you could get one, but if you want insurance to pay for it, there's a minimum age for shingles. The flu vaccine, some health insurances will reimburse you and some of them won't.
I have a question, and I don't want to gear in a whole different topic. Just a question: are pharmacists also able to do these types of? So they already have that. A pharmacist can do this. Okay.
Specifically with shingles, though, it does have potential ocular side effects, so there is a definite benefit to that. Flu, the greater options you have to have a vaccine provided, all the better. I don't see the vast majority of optometrists taking advantage of that, but I think there are certain places where it would be beneficial.
Just from my own experience, the number of patients who come in who won't go to any other doctor. I know we've already said that in a couple of different ways, but I see it every day. And the people who just can't even function or do their daily job without seeing, we will see them. And then we can make those medical recommendations to them that maybe they'll listen to us, whereas they wouldn't have even had a chance to get that from any other physician or provider.
Any other comment? Okay, motion? It's on, can you restate it?
I believe the motion was take a support position on Senate Bill 443.
Okay. Comments from the public, additional?
Just that it's a simile bill.
Oh, it is assembly.
Okay.
Oh, because on the agenda it has SB. AB 443.
All right, thank you. You can call for the vote.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin. Aye. Ms. Burke.
No.
Dr. Chawla.
Aye.
Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre.
Aye.
Mr. Mordami.
Changing genders, changing professions. Aye.
Ms. Ferber is absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, so first, with AB 1708, that's our sunset bill. And I handed out to you members earlier today, and it's on the back table as well, what the board had originally proposed to the legislature. And to be incorporated in our sunset bill, and I'm happy to say that most of them are all in there. The one remaining thing that was not in there was related to the registrations and when they expire, because as you may recall, they are part of a separate portion of the Medical Practice Act and not under the portions of the related statutes to those registrations. So we had asked if they moved it. So a couple interesting things with the medical board sunset bill. They had recommended that it just be struck from them because they're trying to clean up their language, to strike the authority to expire the registrations. So in the process, they had contacted me early on, and they thought that it would be handled in the medical board bill. And so we thought that it was going to be taken care of and not needed to be in our sunset bill. Since then, some other things have happened to the medical board bill that they're working through right now. But I did meet with one of the first, I think it was Tuesday, so Todd's first day or second day with us. I brought him to the governor's office with me, and we talked about a different issue, and then we went and met with the Senate BNP to let them know, because it's the medical board's bill is a Senate bill. And basically have the conversation, let them know, we know you're trying to clean up the Medical Board Act, we totally get it, except when you completely strike the authority to expire the registrations, that then is our authority to renew, which is the revenue for the entire program. So I have a slight concern with that. And they agreed that wasn't the intent at all, so they're fine with us putting it into our bill. So I worked with the committee, and we're going to make those recommendations for amendments in the bill. So that's the good news. The other news is for in 3040 as part of the recommendations, as you may recall from I believe the January discussion. We wanted to clarify in the unlicensed practice statute that offering is the same as advertising. As you may recall, we had some concerns that they're different, and so we wanted to clarify that no, it includes offering. We also wanted to make the statute more concise, which is what we worked with legal counsel to do. And so before you is what the board had approved, and we put that forward to the legislature. Another part of changing 3040 was in what we have unlicensed individuals who are potentially advertising services that they don't have a license to provide. So if you have one entity advertising for services for an optometrist and they're not an optometrist, then the interpretation was that is always not okay. So with that, you have 684, and you have the result of that was 655, which is the Business and Professions Code, and in that you have the relationship between the RDO and the landlord-tenant relationship with the optometrist. There's a whole slew of limitations and kind of parameters for how they can operate this lease agreement. In that, it specifies some requirements for advertising. It's very it says what's allowed when you have this type of relationship. So now the concern that has been raised with stakeholders is how we have proposed 3040. It will, in a way, eliminate their ability to advertise. So you have a situation where you have RDOs, for example, who have a relationship with ophthalmologists or medical corporations, and those medical corporations will directly employ the optometrist. Thus, you're not triggering 655 to apply. So none of the limitations or restrictions or in the enforcement mechanisms, they don't apply to the situations where you have the ophthalmologist in the mix. So you have that kind of triangle. I had assumed, and this is on me, that was unintentional. Because to me, I didn't understand why you would put so many restrictions and limitations and enforcement mechanisms in this relationship, knowing that there's ophthalmologists in there, and there's a way, I don't want to say to work around, but there's a different way to approach it. I have since been told by numerous stakeholders that it was intentional. and to keep ophthalmologists out of that. So I've had a lot of conversations with stakeholders, and that's when I said, okay, we need to have the stakeholders come here, have that conversation with the board, and the board can decide what feedback to provide to the committee in regards to our sunset bill. This was not intended to create, I think, controversy. It was really intended to be technical. But because of the level of concerns that I received, that the committee received, I wanted the board to hear those concerns. Another thing you might want to consider as well is because typically with a sunset bill, you don't want to have really controversial issues in it. And so just an option to throw out there that if you want to take this item and tackle it separately, that's an option, and ask for the committee to take it out of our sunset bill, to move the sunset bill forward and maybe tackle this separately. That's an option. So at that point, I just wanted to open it up to the board for discussion, invite input from the stakeholders, because we have quite a bit of them here that I invited. So thank you for all being really patient and coming. So turn it over to you guys.
Thank you. Let's just start with general comments from board members. Mr. Muradovny.
So specifically on 3040, I recall when this topic was raised, I didn't think, the statute now says just offer, is that right? Or does it say just advertise? Which?
It says advertise, and it's worded differently. So in the handout that I provided, the text is what's there, the red is the strike through that the board had proposed, and the underline are what we're adding.
Okay, well, regardless, my recollections, I took the position when we first started discussing the statute that the wording was sufficient to cover the scenarios that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't think we needed to clarify it. However, I conceded that if it needed to be clarified, we could clarify it through regulation without going through the legislature, because that is our power to clarify ambiguous statutes. So, given the very detailed explanation that you had, I'm of the intent of let's drop the changes for 3040 and deal with it through regulation. When we get all the input and kind of think through all the intricacies and all that, rather than going through the legislature and dealing with that process and delaying our sunset bill. That's my feeling.
Dr. Chella?
I liked your option B of tackling it separately. And that way, rather than having, whatever discussion, not that people should comment, of course, but I like that better because I don't think it's so simple with all the different. I could be wrong. I think that there's enough different opinions that it might be worth removing and tackling separately.
Any other comments from the board? Dr. Turetsky?
I'm open to either way. My concern would be if we follow up with this at a later time, if we drop this from the bill and follow up with this at a later time, how long are we looking at? And the longer this goes, the more and more the current practices, however you want to look at them, are going to become more entrenched, and there will be more entities providing this service. So it's going to get to a point where it's going to be more and more difficult to make any changes.
I meant at the next board meeting as a separate agenda.
Oh,
I didn't mean years from now.
That's what I don't know though. How long can it take? Because so I mean that's my only concern. So I'm open to either way on this, but my only comments.
Public comment.
Christine Schultz again. Just wanted to suggest and to recommend that you deal with it separately. We think that makes sense. We do have concerns with the current language as it's read up there. The number 3 in particular is a problem because that means an optometrist could go to any anybody and say, here, you do all the advertising jointly with us. And I think for that, it's a way to get around the restrictions that we were trying to put together. We never intended, for the record, never intended to have somebody be able to hire an ophthalmologist to get around the very detailed restrictions and limitations and protections in the law that we were trying to make apply to all of these situations. So thank you for your opportunity to talk, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Dr. Tresky?
Maybe you know on this. In a past life, I was the Director of Doctor Relations for Pearl Vision Care for a number of years. And prior to that, I was with LensCrafters when it was owned by USU. And the concept of having an entity other than a Knox-Keene healthcare plan or another optometrist or ophthalmologist employ an OD, the idea of setting up a medical corporation to employ an OD and work side by side next to an optical entity, it's always been out there, hasn't it? That's nothing that's changed with this bill, has it? Somebody could always come up with that.
What bill are you referring to? Are you talking about your sunset bill?
Well, no,
we're
talking about
3040,
3040, and I know that they would, and correct me if I'm going out past my bounds on this. The idea that Jessica said that her understanding was that the change in the law now allowed for a medical corporation to work side by side with an RDO is something that this law now allows. But I thought that's something that could always have been done.
Right, yeah, then that was in, let me back up, and that's, it's not that 684 created a pathway for RDOs to contract with ophthalmologists and medical corporations, or that medical corporations can now employ. That's always been in play.
Okay.
So 684 didn't change that. It was just the idea that none of these enforcement mechanisms and the setup of the relationship was not going to apply to those with the ophthalmologist and the optometrist.
Ah, okay.
Never mind.
Any other questions of this public speaker? Thank you. Next. And as a reminder, we're staying to the 3-minute rule. I know. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rob Patton. I'm the president and CEO of First Sight, and it's a Knox-Keene licensed vision plan. I'm speaking on behalf of First Sight and National Vision, an optical retailer. We oppose the changes to AB 1708 related to 3040. And it makes the advertising restrictions much broader than existing law. This means that any person who does not meet one of the criteria in 655 cannot advertise eye exams or show that they're available, even by independent physicians. So this would include truthful advertising for lawful activity. Why is it important? There's no identified harm to consumers. There's no health and safety issues that we know of. And existing law, 3040, prohibits an unlicensed person from practicing optometry or holding himself or herself out as an optometrist, which means advertising as an optometrist. Other existing consumer protection laws buttress that argument. Since AB 684 became effective, consumer access to eye care in California has demonstrably increased with new arrangements and new products in the marketplace. Nonetheless, all at once, there's legislation proposed that would restrict advertising by those who are making these new offers. We'd also point out that any government entity that proposes to limit professional advertising, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution demands that the restrictions be given heightened security. I'd also like the board to consider this. Why should it be illegal for a person who is not licensed to provide eye exams to truthfully advertise the availability of eye exams by licensed providers? to be truthful advertising about the location of a licensed eye exam provider, or provide various advertising services to licensed exam providers, or provide social media services to licensed eye exam providers. So long as the unlicensed person does not unlawfully provide the eye exams and through its advertising does not claim deceptively or otherwise that it is providing those eye exams.
About 30 seconds.
Finally, we think it is inappropriate to include substantive changes to advertising laws within a sunset bill. If you think it's important, we think it should be handled separately. So we would respectfully ask the board to rescind its request to amend Section 3040 in AB 1708 and leave the existing statute in place unchanged.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Any others?
I'm sorry, just for the record, sir, this is your, make sure this is your document here, correct? It was distributed to the members? Okay. So make sure all members were apprised and have this document in front of them.
Okay, I've been asked to clarify it just a little more. One, with the handout that I had provided for the original proposal was included. When you see on the materials though, the section, I think it's a section 5, yes, section 5, that's how it's in the current 1708. And so they took our amendments, but then after receiving input from stakeholders, that's where you get the 1 through 3. And then after still receiving additional concerns from that, I believe Rob, if you scroll down, they also recommended a 4 that's not in print. That's something that the committee had threw out there to hopefully address concerns from stakeholders. And I don't know if stakeholders had concerns about 4 itself. I think the overall goal is to, from the board, from what I hear, is to request that it's taken out of the sunset bill altogether for now. And so I think that that's basically the input that the committee wanted to know, is where the board stands on these proposed changes. A lot of times they ask me for technical amendments where we think if we see any problems, but in things like this, I think it's important for the board to weigh in on these types of issues. So that's kind of where we stand.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Is there a motion from the board?
So I move to take this portion out of this sunset bill and make it a standalone agenda item for the next board meeting for the board to discuss. And I would like to make sure we do outreach to stakeholders so that they have an opportunity to give public comment.
I second that. Oh, wow. Any comments from the board on the motion? From the public? Madam Secretary?
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla.
Aye.
Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre. Mr. Mardami.
Aye.
Ms. Ferber, absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And members, I want to just clarify that we can request it. They don't have to do it, obviously, so
We
they can
invite them.
go with it. But we're going to provide that input that we'd like to request it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question though. Do we need to take a formal position on the bill?
Thank you. Yes, I'd like a position to support our sunset bill.
So moved.
Any discussion from the board? From the public? We'll go ahead and call for the roll. We did.
Dr. Chawla.
Ms. Brandwein.
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky.
Aye.
Ms. Michelin, aye. Ms. Burke.
Aye.
Dr. Chawla.
Aye.
Ms. Garcia.
Aye.
Dr. Calgucci.
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre. Mr. Mardami.
Aye.
Ms. Ferber, absent. Dr. Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item, 23 future agenda items. Any recommendations from the board? Is there future agenda items?
So members, as you can see, the way that we're displaying it is a little different. We wanted to provide more context of when we plan on tackling these items. When we look at, as far as staff and resources and the types of topics, who we want to attend these meetings, that helps us decide when to place these items on the agenda. If there is at any time something where the board feels that you want it moved to a different meeting, please let us know and we'll work with the board president to make sure it's on a sooner agenda.
So we've added 3040. Anything else you would like to see?
I'd like to see update from NBEO on this year's board examinations and the administration of them. Last update we got was for last year's test, so I just want to make sure we get an update.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that the Department of Consumer Affairs will be doing something around the cannabis issue, given that it becomes legal next year, and what effect does that have on our disciplinary action? You know, considering as we're still working out the kinks legislatively, but I don't know, that's probably not till next year, but some sort of update in terms of how regulatory boards are going to be affected by the legalization of marijuana.
We can reach out to DCA to see when they may have some materials in or presentations, etc. Thank you. Ms. Morigami.
So I'd like just an update from staff as to what they did regarding outreach on cosmetic contact lenses, since this will be after Halloween.
Anything else? Meeting on the side. Dr. McIntyre, Dr. Ramsey, Dr.
Do we have anything on the schedule about an update about like reaching out or communication about online refractions? So I know we have. Okay, never mind.
And I have a question. I thought last time there was an item about staff wanting to do some more outreach with like different, like state societies, or wasn't there something like that on there the last time? You wanted to go to certain functions?
And I'll go back and look, and if not, we'll add it on. Yeah.
That you wanted to just go and be part of some certain functions?
Yeah.
So that
It's on your staff outreach at CE events.
Yes.
Yeah, it's on here.
Okay.
It's gonna be November 4th, second
Okay.
one down.
All right.
Anything else? Suggestions from the public? Thank you. We'll process that as we take a look at our next agenda. And that brings us to the close. Thank you all very much for participating in our 2-day session.